Yes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a hearing into the Dundee City Council Mill Street Broughty Ferry stopping up order 2021. My name is Paul Coquette and I'm a reporter appointed to report to Scottish ministers into the 28 objections that made to the stopping up order. The order itself was made under sections 207 and 208 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997 and can be made by the Council and confirmed by ministers if satisfied that it's necessary to enable development to be carried out under a planning permission. The planning permission that's relevant to this application for the order is for a cycleway, footpath and associated infrastructure at Castle Green Park, an esplanade at Broughty Ferry, and the planning reference number is 20/00534 FUL. I think parties will be aware, I've made an unaccompanied site visit to the area to see the subject matter of the order and the immediate vicinity. I did so on Sunday, 6th of March, early afternoon. I mentioned the timings because I know that some of the issues have arisen in relation to the most likely usage of the area concern. This is a virtual hearing, but it's been broadcast live and will be available on the DPA website afterwards for parties to view again. I personally find the virtual hearings are quite useful because it allows myself and all parties involved to have obviously a very accurate ability to go back and look at the evidence that was given and record the evidence in that way rather than old school recording it as we go. So if you need to access the webcast, it can be found on www.dpa.scotland.gov.uk and the reference number for that, I think you all know, but it's SUO-180-001, which you search under to find that. Attendees and participants at this morning's hearing are taken to be consenting to the recording for that use and the usage by DPA for those purposes for data protection reasons. I should emphasise to all parties that regardless of what's said at this hearing and specific representations made in relation to the hearing, my report will give equal weight to all the objections, whether written or otherwise, and objectors can contribute to the discussion this morning as they think fit or are entitled to rest on the written submissions. And I know that some participants today are less familiar with the reporting system and the hearing system and shouldn't in any way feel that they either have to contribute in detail or that they'll be prejudiced by not participating in any way today. I'd very much welcome participation by all parties involved. The reason for proceeding with a hearing this morning rather than with a full public inquiry involving legal representation and cross-examination is to keep the procedure that we have this morning as relaxed and as informal as it can be. Formally, the position is that the questioning that will arise, which will mainly be addressed to Dundee City Council's lawyer and witnesses here today, it will be through me. But at any point, if either Paul or Mark, there's anything that I'm not bringing you in or there's questions that are coming to your mind as we work through the agenda, then please feel free to say and we'll bring you in. So we're quite relaxed about the extent to which you should want to be involved, and you can either signal by putting something on the chat bar or just by raising your hand if at any stage you want to participate at any point as we go through. But I'll try and bring you in at all relevant times to make sure that you're getting a reasonable opportunity to say your piece. As I said a few moments ago, before the formal meeting started, the agenda will proceed as has been circulated previously, but for the sake of tidiness, the case management system, the DPS, has now had a version of that uploaded, but there are no changes to the agenda that was circulated before. As I say, the question will generally be led by me. We have council witnesses and statements and a legal submission on behalf of the council. The main purpose of having the council witnesses' statements is because there's several witnesses, is to ensure that I can understand what the background and the professional qualifications are of the witnesses, mainly so that we can know which witness is going to be best placed to answer which questions. Although, as with both Paul and Mark, whoever feels best qualified to answer any one particular question should obviously feel free to do so. But knowing what the professional backgrounds are is certainly useful to me to get a sense of knowing what areas that they're liable to be asked questions on. The hearing this morning is set down for the morning. We can go into the afternoon if needs be. I don't know if that will be needed, and we'll just have to judge that as we go. DPA practice has been, because of the slightly different nature of virtual hearings, to have fairly regular breaks if those prove necessary. If anybody wants to take a break at any point, just say it and we could adjourn for a few moments if requested. I'm have in mind if we need to, we can take a break around 11:30 for a few minutes as for a comfort stop at that particular point. Just at this stage now, introduce parties and ask them to introduce themselves, and in the council's case, their witnesses, and to say anything that they want to at this stage in relation to what I've said already, or anything around the agenda that's been circulated. So first of all, Maureen Moran, on behalf of the council, if you want to formally introduce your witnesses this morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Kickett. My name is Maureen Moran. I am the Senior Manager of Dundee City Council's litigation team, which covers all litigation matters at the council, including matters such as stopping up appeals and hearings that we have here today. And it's my role to present the council's case from the legal perspective. I think my colleagues are better placed than I to inform the reporter and the objectors on the issues in terms of the actual scheme itself. But from a legal perspective, it will be my role to make any comments as far as the legalities of the stopping up order are concerned.
Okay, thank you. I think, Mr. Daly, your interest here is relatively straightforward in the sense that you're just representing yourself. I've seen a letter of objection for your part, which was dated 21st of April last year, and we'll address that and other issues, and you can feel free to comment more widely than the issues referenced in your letter of objection. But I've certainly noted your position at this stage. Is there anything you want to say just now before we get started into a bit more detail of what we're looking at today?
No, not really. Just wanting to listen in as much as anything else, and perhaps if interject if I think it's necessary. But I mean, I think all the documentation that we've put forward should represent our views pretty comprehensively.
That's fine. Thank you for that. And as far as Mark's concerned, he's obviously an objector in his own right and has lodged a statement of reasons, a statement of case, and written representations. Mark, I don't think he's claiming to be representing, but his other parties, other objectors, but nevertheless, other objectors have associated themselves with the various representations put forward by him, which include Paul Daly and Christina Sibby. I also have noted on that Stephen Olivier, Joan O'Connell, Leila Kalbasi, Sarah Broxham, Gordon and Orlatai Draper, and Carol Stewart. One point I should just make at the start is that another objector had indicated a concern that an objection from Gordon Draper had not been included amongst the various papers that were circulated, and the council have confirmed that they didn't receive a formal objection from Mr. Draper. But I'm working on the basis that he's associating himself with the papers compiled by Mark Lindsay, and accordingly that the concerns that he has are represented in what's set out there, even if there is some uncertainty as to whether there's a separate objection, and he's a separate objector. I'm simply treating him as such because of his association with that. But I just wanted to record that because of a little bit of uncertainty about whether he was an objector in his own right. So, Mark, I don't know if you want to say anything about your intentions for this morning or anything you want to say at this stage. Hearing you, Mark.
As far as
the group that propose with representation. It's a user group of residents who I've consulted regularly, engaged with and included basically. So that's where it is from their perspective. And the other thing, I just would like to say at the outset, you know, we are fully supportive of the project overall. We see huge merits in this, recognise the substantial contribution that everyone has made to it. It's only in specific aspects of this. So I think it would be fair to say on behalf of the residents that, you know, we are fully supportive of the overall project and the benefits that it can bring.
Thank you. Right, okay, that's fine. I'm grateful for that. And just emphasise, in light particular of that comment, we'll proceed with the questions that I'll lead on just now, and give people opportunities to ask questions or comment at appropriate times. Anybody should feel able to refer to any document that's been lodged. I've read all the documents. I've got some of them in front of me and some of them up on screen, and some that may appear to be a bit less relevant, but I can get them up if needs be. As I say, I would assure parties that I've read all the documents. I should say, in addition to the points raised by those who are attending today by or on behalf of objectors, just as notice to the council, one of the documents is one document that's lodged by the council, which is entitled Objector Documentation. It was lodged very early in the process. It's a 55-page document lodged on the 30th of November in 2021. Just to say that at an appropriate time, perhaps as a mop-up once through anything not covered more generally by the agenda, I intend to be referring and asking questions of some of the objector in relation to the objections that are set out in that document. But there's also, as I say, I think there was an administrative issue with Mr. Daly's objection that isn't on that document. So his objection on 24th April 2021 is relevant as well. And I should also say that other documents that I'll be intending to ask questions on relate to the statement of case or other documents from Les Gourlay, Gavin Halliday, Anne Greenway, and also Mark as well. So there'll be other things that are out with that list of objector documentation that's there. I should also say to the council's witnesses that I'll be asking them to take me through the traffic data and traffic information about the sampling that was done at various dates. So if relevant witnesses could make sure they've got that document available, and I'll be asking questions to go through that. Okay, right. Assuming there's no other matters anybody wants to raise at this stage, then I would intend to start effectively from the agenda as circulated yesterday, and really start with Dundee City Council and ask them if they just wanted to, actually in a moment, whether they want to say anything over and above what they've lodged in their representations as for the justification for the scheme in relation to the necessity test, which is the requirement of the legislation. And I'll ask Maureen to say something maybe about that in a moment. Before I do so, I wonder if I could ask, and I think these are probably questions for Maureen. I've just got one or two technical issues and technical questions that I just want to make sure that I've fully and properly understood before we get into that substantive question. The first of which is, in terms of the legislation, there are restrictions as to what can be done by way of stopping up an order where the impact on a right-of-way, where there might be the possibility of a right-of-way being extinguished for the purposes of apparatus that belongs to a statutory undertaker, and that's a requirement in Schedule 16. I'd be grateful for confirmation. I'm assuming it's the case that there is no apparatus known to the council under the road that's in the ownership of any statutory undertaker, or that any statutory undertaker presumably has not made any indication that they have any objection to the order in that respect.
That's correct, Mr. Pickett. I did check to ensure that the statutory undertakers and all statutory consultees had been consulted in this regard, and we have had no objection in respect of any of those statutory undertakers who were all consulted.
Okay, thank you. Also, and we'll come into the more detail of this, I think, when we go through the some of the points made by Mark on the interrelationship with the planning permission. I'm working on the basis that that planning permission remains an extant planning permission and is not being challenged or under a challenge at this stage. But if that's not the case, you'll let me know.
That is correct.
Fine. Okay, we'll come back to that issue later. It's fine. And just to confirm, I think you have effectively confirmed that in your representations, but I'm taking it that the roads concerned are all public roads that are on your list of adopted roads that are supposed to be stopped up.
That's correct.
That's fine. The other thing, and I may have missed this from the papers that I've seen in terms of the statutory obligations of consultation in relation to the order. I've seen the newspaper adverts, they've been lodged, but there's an obligation, as you'll know, to intimate to all owners, occupiers and tenants with a tenancy of more than a month who have an interest in the property. I've not seen, I don't think, a certification that requirement has been was fulfilled. It may well be there are no owners of land other than the City Council themselves around that area, but I just wonder whether you could confirm the position regarding owners and occupiers, and I'm particularly thinking here of the Solum of the road, because as you know, adjacent owners of the Solum, adjacent property owners may well have an interest in the Solum. But I just wonder, just in terms of the strict requirements of Schedule 16, if you can confirm the position as to what was done in relation to owners, occupiers, and anybody else with a relevant interest.
As I understand it, Mr. Coquette, there are no other owners. I did look at that again yesterday also in terms of what the legal requirements were in terms of serving and notice, and there are no others.
There's no others. The land is actually wholly owned by Dundee City Council. That's fine. So that's fine. So there were no issues as far as the Solum of the road is concerned. Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, again, maybe I don't know if you want to say anything over and above what you've said in terms of the necessity text of the justification of the order.
I think we'll just be clear. Sorry, it's a bit of feedback, but I think I just want to be clear. I have referred in the course of the statement, and also my colleagues have referred in the course of their statements to Mill Street. We also obviously include in that the stopping up order rather is for Mill Street and the 20 metres westwards from Kirkby towards Mill Street itself. And that when we refer to Mill Street, we are also referring to that just for clarity.
Okay. That's useful. Yeah.
Entirety of the stopping up order. So I think I have addressed in both the statement and the submissions made in respect of this hearing that the requirement in terms of section 207 and 208, and I haven't specifically addressed the issue in terms of the first element of whether the road's a public road and a public footpath, excuse me, because that I had not understood to be in dispute, but that is, I can clarify that as well.
Yeah, I just want to get that clarification. I don't think it is a matter of dispute. I was simply wanted to check to make sure. And it was mainly actually in relation to things like ownership of the road, but no, that's helpful to be aware of that. Okay, no, that's helpful. So I'm not sure I particularly need addressed in detail on the Network Rail case. Thank you for lodging that. It's a case I was familiar with, I'd seen before, and so I understand the arguments there. But I wonder whether it's possible for your witness to speak a little bit about the extent to which the necessity test is met effectively simply by the granting of planning permission. I think Mr. Swankie, is probably has cross-referenced that, and obviously there needs to be a crossover between the stopping up order, which doesn't sit independently in its own right, but there's a kind of took a little bit from its evidence that the granting of the planning permission may be not quite the end of the story, but effectively gets the council there in terms of the obligation under the different provisions in the Planning Act. But I just wondered whether he could perhaps expand a little bit on whether he thinks it's simply the grant that does it, or whether there's a kind of what scope that the council recognise for other considerations to come into play for the stopping up order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like you said from the statement, I think the planning consent forms an important part of this overall project for the council, and it's stopping off Mill Street is an essential element of this overall project to provide the active travel route through Castle Green Park and along the Esplanade. We've been through the processes with committee, and I think this has been evidenced through the important statement. So I refer to, I think it's section 12 of my statement as well.
Yeah.
All the information, but just refer back to that. I think the application does cover the many benefits to be achieved through the stopping up order, and it provides from a planning perspective application for the success. Maybe it's very good comment for the specific stopping up order requirement. But.
Presumably, the planning permission. Planning permission is a means to an end and not an end in itself. So if the order were not confirmed, I think I'm taking from your evidence that you're required to go and amend the planning application, and that would be a consequence of that. But that's not a reason to grant it in itself. I think you said that you regarded it as being essential. Now, I'd like to ask you a question, but I want to ask Mr. Conway a question as well. Is whether your view is that it is actually essential to the scheme, or whether it's desirable to make a better scheme effectively. So I just wonder whether you want to tease that out a little bit, just that difference between something that's absolutely essential and something that is just desirable.
Checking it. Are you asking me that question?
I will ask that question. Yes, I'm going to ask you that question. And I'll maybe ask Craig first of all, and then come back to you, Jerry, on that.
No, I would consider it an essential element. Yes, the overall aim of the scheme to provide the continuous active travel route through Castle Green Park and Mill Street and onto the Esplanade would not be achieved without stopping up Mill Street. It would result in the break and the path right through. I know there's alternative ways around in terms of going along the south and these kind of options, but it does not provide the type of cycle path, the size of cycle path that we're looking to provide. And it would miss all the benefits in terms of connecting up Windmill Gardens and surrounding parkland that I think, it is I consider essential for that to be achieved.
And it's that same question of Jerry then, because I think you mentioned this also in your evidence. Is that your view as well?
Yeah, that's 100% my view. The objective of the scheme and the object and the funding that we receive from Sustrans is to achieve as far as possible a completely off carriageway, away from carriageway, and segregated cycleways or shared space away from carriageway. So taking the route through Castle Green provides that, taking the cyclists and pedestrians away from carriageway space. And that completes the route through from Dundee all the way through to Mayfield as being 100% off carriageway, bar a very small section in the Standard Gate.
Mm-hmm. So if it were refused, what would the impact be on the scheme then? Would there be no scheme, I suppose, at its extreme level? Would the whole thing require to be abandoned? Or
no, the whole thing.
In a second.
No, the whole thing wouldn't need to be abandoned. The alternatives would be, in my opinion, less favourable in that they were more likely they would take up more carriageway space, they would take up more parking space. The alternative routes would likely take the initial part of Castle Street and then take some area off of Castle Lane. And none of that is to the favour of a cyclist who's trying to get a direct route. So that would put cyclists in a position of having to come in contact with traffic and to manoeuvre through junctions, or alternatively that we take over more traffic space in order to provide the priority routes for cyclists. So that would have a major impact on the west end of Castle Street and all of Castle Lane in order to provide an alternative route for cyclists. And the cyclists would also then be on carriageway. So Sustrans Guidance also looks to try to provide a safe means of access for children of 12 years and over cycling on their own. So obviously, clearly, the desire is not to be close to carriageways if at all possible.
Okay. Paul's got his hand up. Do you want to ask your question through me, Paul?
Yeah, if I could, and to be honest, this is the kind of nub of the issue I've been kind of scratching my head about since this whole thing started. I've never really understood why it wouldn't be possible to put the cycle route along Castle Approach and expand the path between the car park and the beach. It seems like that would be capable of being done. It looks like a bit of it is already being done. And it would avoid cyclists having to cross the car park traffic, the egress and ingress of the car park traffic. And it would also avoid having to bifurcate the Castle Green space, which my 14-year-old daughter plays there, runs around there quite safely because there's not a lot of cycle traffic in there. But what's been proposed is a major cycle pathway going through it, which is, to me, one of the statements about Sus Drive that it's meant to provide a safe environment for kids to move around and get exercise, and it seems like it would undermine that. So the whole kind of construct of stopping up Mill Street and putting the cycle path through that green space, I've never understood when it seems like there's a viable alternative.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I had actually two questions about alternatives within the scheme, which I think might be an appropriate time now to come to. But Jerry, you had your hand up when Paul was speaking there, so I don't know if you're wanting to respond to what he was saying.
Yeah, it was just to pick up on what Paul was saying. Sorry, there's a bit back there. Picking up on what Paul was saying, that there is an alternative route which would be a shared use space along the beachfront. We are, as Paul said, at the moment widening the beachfront. The current beachfront path is less than 2 meters wide, and we are widening that to 5 meters. So at present, cyclists are not allowed to use the beachfront because of the danger. There's a 1.5 meter fall from the edge of the path, unprotected fall down to the beach. We will provide protection for that and thereby allowing cyclists to use that. But this is, the beachfront is Broughty Ferry's premier beachfront, and as the objectives have stated a number of times, can be extremely busy during the summer periods. The other matter is that the National Cycle Route number 1, which we are improving, currently goes through Castle Green, currently goes through very much adjacent to the existing play areas, so is in conflict with everything that Paul's saying. So the reason that we are putting this alternative route is to take away that conflict with the children's area. We've moved the path to the north end of Castle Green as far as possible, away from where the children will play. And we are not wanting to promote commuting cycles in particular to be using a beachfront, particularly during the busy periods in the summer.
Yeah, but is that to do with so it's a beachfront, and you said there was a fall down to the but actually for parties' benefits, I've got one of the plans 05A in front of me as I'm looking at as I'm asking these questions, and I see that there is the potential, it's shown brown on this map here, of going along the beachfront, but I think you're indicating that has a proximity to the beach itself, and that if that was the cycle path, that would be a shared cycle path between pedestrians and cyclists using that along the Esplanade. And I suppose the question in my mind is the width of that, whether that's wide enough to be safely used with the interaction of pedestrians and cyclists. But that presumably is the alternative. I recognise what you say, it'd be different from the current plan, but that presumably is the alternative that Paul's talking about.
Yeah, that appears to be the alternative that Paul's talking about. And as I said, yes, we are widening that. We are making it safer. We are going to make it suitable for cyclists, but we do not see that as being the priority route for cyclists. It would be more a leisure route for visitors who did want to go to the beachfront or to see the beachfront. But particularly for commuting cyclists, they need a more direct route away from busy pedestrian traffic.
And by commuting cyclists, presumably you mean both those who are using the long distance path for the longer distance reasons, the more ultra cyclists, and maybe also literally commuters I suppose, who might be commuting into Dundee, I guess, from there, if there are such people. I don't know. So yeah, I understand the point you're saying. It's the leisure, the leisure route as opposed to the commuting route. Okay, that's that's helpful from that perspective to understand that. I think you said that this would be a change from where cyclists would go at present. Since we're on the question, so I've got Mark's got his hand up now before I go on to my next point, which is a separate point. Do you want to make a point here, Mark? You have to come off mute.
Realised the comments that Jerry was making that there were actually going to be cyclists, because having looked at the flyby video, we can see it does actually depict cyclists on there, which had been confusing. But so the intention is to do that. And is that along similar lines to what's happening in the Douglas Terrace area just now, where there's a shared path? Is that the idea of the design of that?
Should answer that question.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, the Douglas Terrace is a shared cycle path, pedestrian path, or similar. Yeah.
So in effect, we're making the space going through Castle Green is going to be a dedicated cycle path with an alternative one on the front along the lines of what already exists. That's okay. Thank you.
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
No, sorry, that's not correct. It's not a dedicated cycle path through Castle Green. It's a shared space. So
shared space.
So all of the section through Castle Green is a shared space. So that's pedestrians and cyclists. The section along the beachfront is a shared space, pedestrians and cyclists. The section that's just recent is being constructed under the flood protection scheme from Douglas Terrace to Beach Crescent is a shared space. So these are all shared space where pedestrians and cyclists will share the same area.
So it'll be extra on top of the one that's going to go along the beachfront, which is similar to what's happening in other parts of the route. Okay.
Yeah, it's an alternative, yes.
Yeah. And I think that actually was a point that Anne Begg had made. One of the other objectors had questioned also the need for the proposal as it stands just now, because of the fact that there could be two cycle paths in close proximity. Presumably, Jerry, that would be your answer to Anne Begg's point as well.
I'm not sure what two cycle paths in close proximity are referring to.
I was interpreting her point of questioning why you could have two potential cycle paths, one of which the proposed route along Mill Street and the other along the front in close proximity, why you needed two, and presumably your answer about one being dedicated and one being a shared space would be the answer to that as well.
No, just to be clear, none of them are dedicated cycle paths. They are both shared paths. So there's an alternative to use the beachfront or the Castle Green. The beachfront, as we expect and as everyone knows, is very, very busy in the summer or any days where there's nice weather, and will become very busy and populated with pedestrians. So that provides an alternative route through Castle Green, and more particularly a more direct route for commuters through Castle Green.
Okay, thank you. Now, Paul will get his hand up just now, but that may be from earlier on. I don't know if he wants to come in again.
I'm sorry, I would like to, and I'm sorry to be honest, but it's kind of the core issue in my mind. So, talking about the other areas, Douglas Terrace and the Esplanade, where the arrangement is a kind of a wide shared space, I don't really understand, and they're both busy places and are busier now as a consequence of the work that's been done. I don't really understand why it is that the area we're talking about should be significantly different. If you can have a widened shared bike path through there, the times when it's busy is not commuting times, but the weekends. So I would have thought that would be adequate in the way it is for the other parts of the cycle route to accommodate all the needs. It seems overkill to me to have another cycle path, particularly dedicated for commuters through the park area.
Okay, I've got Ewan and James with his hand up now. I'll come to Ewan first.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a couple of points, particularly in response to that last question. There were surveys undertaken, surveys of pedestrians and cyclists undertaken multiple locations along the route. What that determined was, as you'd expect, that the usage varied along the NCN1, depending on the different locations. With particular regard to the section that we're discussing at the moment, it does experience a heavier footfall. So from a capacity point of view and from an alternative route point of view, that is part of the consideration. Just one other point. Design criteria as well. One of the 6 design criteria is to reallocate road space and restrict motor permeability, and that's higher in favour of active travel over motorised traffic. So there's other considerations specific to this location.
Okay, thank you. And then James.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, it was just really, again, just with regard to the beachfront, just highlighting, the placemaking we're actually looking at. We see that as an area where we want to include extensive placemaking that will include sort of high quality paving, benches, public art, street furniture. We're also looking to improve disability access to the beach as well. So making sort of DDA compliant ramps to the beach. And we have been working closely with charity organisations to look at ways to improve wheelchair access to the beach. And I think just within that promenade area of having, an alternative route that runs through the kind of more direct route also takes away that kind of conflict as well. And as I say, kind of the area around is really creates a kind of safe space to kind of take in the views of the castle, the beach, and also improves the access via the integrated ramp. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you. Was there anything else, Mark, you wanted to add?
Well, it was just to thank. Paul's point was when I was just want to be clear that there will be 2 in close proximity shared cycle walking. It was just to pick up on the point that James was making. I mean, my argument is that the overall effect of this and the stop up, which obviously we'll come to later, is going to have extreme effects on traffic at busy times. And if we're speaking about beach access, etc., for groups those who it's essential to bring traffic to the front, that we think that the build-up of traffic and the volume of traffic that's going to be as a result of having the road stopped up will actually inadvertently discriminate against them. And we would ask, is there a publicly available document that demonstrates why the stopping up of the route will have no significant effect on traffic patterns, because we feel that the whole area is going to become busier, and people like the one James was referring to, groups like that, are going to be the health and safety aspect at the front will be because of the build-up of traffic and the blocking of the road. It's the knock-on effect it's going to have.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Jerry just now. We may come back. In fact, we will come back to traffic impact. So you may get an answer to your question a bit later on, but we'll deal with that a little bit later in the agenda if we may. But if Jerry wants to come back just on the points made by Mark there. Jerry, you're not coming across very clearly.
You're on mute, Jerry.
Sorry.
Again.
It was just to point out that if the main route was to be along the beachfront, then cyclists would require to cycle down Castle Approach from the end of St Vincent Street, which would be on road at that location. Alternatively, we would need to change the design to include a segregated cycleway on Castle Approach. So the Castle Green gives it completely off-road.
Okay, thank you. I was going to raise a related issue with that, and actually just it may be an appropriate time to do that, just on that question of interaction of cyclists with car users. And I see that's one of the main attributes in terms of cycling accessibility, that's that the scheme as a whole, the National Cycle Path that area will bring, and that's to reduce, I think, either to nil or close to nil the interactions between cyclists and cars. And I've heard what Jerry said about the castle approach issue there. One thing, and maybe I've just not really properly understood this, but I wonder if you could explain the proposal as it stands just now involves, as I said, looking at Plan 05A, cyclists moving away from the Esplanade front and then to the south of Windmill Gardens and through. The question that's in my mind is traffic will still be able to travel down Castle Lane heading south, and traffic will come along the Esplanade heading west. And the car park, I think, remains. The intention of the car park remains with a few smaller number of spaces. Is there going to be an interaction between cyclists and cars who are trying to access the car park, namely those turning right, coming down Castle Lane, wanting to access the car park, and those turning left, coming along the Esplanade, wanting to go into the car park? And how's that interaction with cyclists, if that is the case, going to be managed? I saw something that suggested possibly the car park entrance might be being moved. I mean, certainly I would think reconfigured, but maybe that's part of an answer to that. But I'm curious, since one of the advantages has been suggested is to eliminate or at least reduce the interactions. Maybe I've misunderstood what's proposed there, but I want you to just explain how vehicles getting in and out of the car park will or will not interact potentially with cyclists. I don't know who's best placed to answer that. It's Jerry's hand up. So
yeah, so the design that the car park enters is we stop at Mill Street, and the design, the entrance to the car park then moves to the east end of Windmill Car Park. And yes, there is an interaction. However, the current designs show the priority route is for the pedestrians and the cyclists. So what we call a tabletop. So there will be a raised level where the vehicles, the traffic vehicles, cars or vans, would have to rise up onto a tabletop and give way to pedestrians and cyclists who are using the route. So it changes the priority.
Okay. Is this the proposed carriageway raised table crossing that's shown on Plan 05A?
That's correct.
It's the red area there, and there's some yellow,
Yeah.
which is described as blister tackle.
Blister tactiles.
Tactile, beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there will be a potential interaction, and so cyclists will have to take care at that point. But it'll be presumably a deterrent for speed of cars going down there. I mean, certainly from what I saw on the site, there hopefully isn't an area that cars are driving at a high speed on, but presumably there will be an interaction at that point. But it's managed, as you say, by the raised carriageway.
It's managed by the raised carriageway, yes, and the pedestrian priority, and the recent changes to the highway code giving pedestrians priority at junctions.
Yep. Okay, no, that's helpful. I don't know if either Paul or Mark had anything on that particular point. That was mainly for my information, but they can out if they did. Since we're actually on the question, Mark, yeah.
No, it was just to say very briefly that, given the volume of traffic, hopefully, which we were able to put across by the photographs which we submitted, in what we would call peak times, we think there is a significant difference here. And I think coming into contact would be very significant, because the volume of traffic, once that car park is full, which happens very early, as demonstrated in the photographs, the pressure on the surrounding spaces is immense. And people coming up Castle Lane, wanting to turn right, and also approaching along the Esplanade with no western exit, there's going to be cars turning. We see it happening on a regular basis at busy times. And I would just make the point that the pressure on there would be significant for cyclists coming into contact with vehicles.
What provisions intended to be made then to help vehicles turn? I don't know if I don't see a roundabout or anything of that sort of nature. If a vehicle is coming along the Esplanade and intending to turn left into the car park and finds the car park is full, what would they do, and how can pedestrian and cyclist safety be assured for vehicles turning in the way that Mark has described?
Can I answer that? Yep. Okay. So vehicles on the Esplanade who are travelling westbound, the priority at Brook Street is to be promoted as the main route into and out of the Esplanade. So any vehicle who's at the east end of the Esplanade travelling to leave the Broughty Ferry would exit by Brook Street. The priority at Brook Street Junction, I don't know if you have that plan, but the priority at Brook Street Junction is being changed such that the direct route is for the vehicle who's travelling north up Brook Street. So coming from the east end Esplanade, they would then come along and they would be directed to travel up to Brook Street. So the only traffic coming along to the beachfront would be traffic who want to use the car park and park at the car park. There's in the region of 50 car parking spaces there. So if a car comes along and finds that there is no space, then they have to then turn around in the car park and then repeat and go back up and either go along the Esplanade to find a parking space or go back up Brook Street. So the actual number of traffic heading along to the west end of the Esplanade will be reduced to only those who want to come and park in the car park.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that's one of the issues here is that people are going to continue to come along and try and park either on the Esplanade or in the car park, and you're going to have quite a high volume, I suspect, of people doing 3-point turns in that space, which is a space where, as James said, they're trying to placemake and bring more pedestrians and cyclists. Then it just seems like a bit of a recipe for congestion and increased risk, which is the other issue that I've kind of got with stuff like that.
Thank you. Now we're on the topic of looking at alternatives. There were two other alternatives that I'd noted from the papers that were suggested that have not otherwise been dealt with. One of which was a suggestion, I think it might have been Mark, I'm not sure, a suggestion that Mill Street would remain open on a one-way basis, but with a narrower carriageway. And I just wondered what the council's view of that proposal would be. Okay.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, well, whatever.
We'd need to look at the detailed designs of what he's proposing. I mean, it's very simplistic that we're saying a one-way direction. So we had looked at earlier options where westbound cyclists would use that, and we could reduce Mill Street down to a single lane, and westbound cyclists would use that. Eastbound cyclists would then have to use Castle Street and Castle Lane, so that would reduce the parking in Castle Street and at the west end of Castle Street, and then into Castle Lane, and the westbound cyclists then would have to cross over Esplanade to gain access to the segregated cycleway.
Okay. So Ewan?
Yeah, thank you. Just to probably make the point that it's a transformational project. It's the largest travel project in the region in the century to date in terms of value and scale. It's a very cost-wise, it's a high-end proposal. It works out as £2.5 million per kilometre, and again, it's enabled to realise some of the objectives from Sustrans, who are funding this from a national basis, and it's been evaluated by the panel, which includes officials from Transport Scotland. The placemaking aspects of it wouldn't be realised with that proposal, nor with the permeability of vehicular traffic, or the reallocation of road space aspects of it. Just in terms of actually just in a general broader view, the volumes of traffic which are experienced down there, and again they vary along the route, but particularly around Mill Street. There's more travel at present on average than there are vehicle traffics. And the modelling undertaken for the scheme forecasts on a greater than doubling in the number of active travel users. So 127% increase of active travel users. That scenario, as modelled, which has been done against the Department for Transport's active movement guide, would see more cyclists than cars.
Okay, thank you. Mark's hand still up. I don't know if that is again from earlier or whether you want to come in on this point.
I think it's a question in relation to what Ewan was saying there. I mean, there'll be a heavier than it's planned to bring as many people as we can down to the beachfront, but they will not all come. All the extra bodies, that's part of the argument which we have going throughout the whole thing. Many of them will bring vehicles to the area to access the beachfront because it is a destination and it is an increasingly popular destination. So there's going to be far more vehicles there anyway, even with bringing people who are contributing to the extra footfall, which is going to have a significant effect on the traffic in the area. That's part of what we're coming. I know we're going to speak about traffic surveys, but we feel that there's an underestimation of the volume of traffic. As anybody living locally will tell you, from late spring through to the end of October, it's significantly different at busy times, which makes a lot of these things that we're discussing, it's going to exacerbate things. Like,
okay, thank you. And Jerry?
Just picking up on the comments there, what we're promoting is in line with the government's agenda, it's in line with the council's agenda, is to promote active travel and sustainability. So the links of the cycle route will encourage people to be more active, using more active travel. It links up with e-bike schemes that have docking stations up at the railway station in Broughty Ferry and interacts with bus routes. So the object of the proposal is to reduce the number of vehicle trips and promote active travel trips, and that is the government agenda.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think Paul, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, if I could add in. I mean, I think it's a great objective, and I kind of fully support the idea of reduced vehicular traffic and increased cycling and pedestrian. But I think this particular location, there needs to be a recognition that this is not just a pass-through area, it's also a destination area, which is what I think makes it a bit different from the other parts of the Esplanade and Douglas Terrace, that while people may pass through and you may get more cyclists, the reality, although I understand the council and the government would like there to be less vehicular traffic, the reality that as residents that we're seeing is that there's an increase in people coming to the beach and using it as a destination. It's now the designated safe swimming area. It's the best bit of beach in the city. There's a medieval castle there and a big green play area. And that is going to continue to bring people in their cars, particularly families, older people who may not be able to get on a bike and pass through it. And we've seen that over the last couple of years, even through the COVID epidemic, we've seen increased vehicular traffic in there. And so I understand the desire that there'll be less cars, but I think it's a bit of wishful thinking, to be honest with you. I just think there's going to continue to be an increase in the amount of cars trying to look for parking spaces and trying to pass through that area.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thanks. Ewan's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much. I do recognise Paul's comments, and again, it has been raised with us previously. It's true, as Paul says, that vehicle usage has increased decade on decade. We believe, or the objective is that we're now at peak car use. The objectives of the Scottish Government is to decrease car kilometres by 20% by the end of the decade, by 2030. And part of enabling that objective is to invest in transformational projects of this nature. And again, this is why there is importance on things like permeability, the disincentive for car use, and creating high quality active travel provision. And again, that has been modelling undertaken, which has been assessed against other similar projects which have been delivered, which have seen these significant changes into mode of transport to destination. And Dundee does have a lot of advantages in some respects. We've got a predominantly low vehicle access household percentage. About half of the households in Dundee don't have access to a vehicle, and again, close proximity being a small city as well. So that's partly to do with the reasoning for this.
Okay. Right, thank you. I'm going to move on to a couple of the last points in alternatives. And two of the alternatives, one of which I think has been dealt with already in correspondence, but two of the alternatives talk in terms of better use of council tax money and council money for other purposes. I think Professor Begg in his representations made points in that aspect that seem to apply to Professor Begg. So if there's anything further you want to say about that, feel free to do so. But the other person who made similar points was Gillian Martin in her objection, where she suggested that the money on this scheme might be better spent improving the footpaths and the roads more widely in the Broughty Ferry area, and that would have been a more efficient and effective use of council resource rather than doing this. So again, just because that point is in her objection, and at this stage, I don't know if council officials want to say anything either about Gillian Martin's or indeed Professor Begg's objections, as I've seen the response to Professor Begg, but anything further in this respect would be useful. So, Jenny.
So just so everyone understands, the active travel scheme has been 100% funded through Sustrans, through the Scottish Government. This isn't direct council money that's being used. And the reason that we've managed to get the funding for this scheme is on the back of the active travel improvements that we're carrying out on the flood protection scheme, which is immediately adjacent to the active travel scheme. So the option of using this money to repair potholes is not within the council's powers to reallocate that money. This money is dedicated for the active travel scheme. So hopefully that clears that one up.
Thank you. On the question of Sustrans funding, and again, this is maybe one for James Mullen, is that in his recognition that there's a suggestion. I just wanted to tease this out to understand it properly. Is that I understand that the Sustrans funding is for the scheme that's been put. Is it the council's position that if the stopping up isn't permitted and an alternative comes, then the entire Sustrans funding will simply not come to support the scheme? You see what I mean? Did they regard this as an essential part of it? I can see why it might be a desirable part of it, and that's what's been put to them. But is it your understanding that Sustrans will not fund the scheme if the stopping up's refused?
So also to funding, we had a number of stages in terms of developing concept design, then the detailed design, and then we're into the technical design stage prior to construction. Now, at the stages to get the funding for construction, as Jerry's highlighted, Sustrans will fund 70% of the fund. Now, at the beginning of the project, it was 50%, and then they've increased it to 70%. But we've been managed to use an opportunity to link the work start to travel improvements and create a much more improved place in terms of the Broughty Ferry flood protection scheme. Now, we've been working through each of the stages through Sustrans, where we've got 100% funding for each of the design stages. But in order to get the award for the construction costs, we had to take the design, which included everything, engagement, all the reports and all the information, to a Sustrans panel. And I think you earlier that included representatives from Transport Scotland, various other groups were part of that panel. Now they're looking at the project as a whole, which includes the placemaking. It looks at Mill Street, it looks at the segregated cycle route, it looks at the Dicty Bridge, there's a pinch point. So they're considering the project as a whole, and they're comparing it against other projects. This is a competitive process where you're bidding for funding between other projects. Now, Dundee has been, this project has been seen as an exemplar project. It's a Category 4 project where you get high support from Sustrans throughout the whole stage. So in terms of what we presented is the full scheme. Now, to say that we won't get the funding for if Mill Street Stock and Ordered, I can't answer that, but we would need to go back to Sustrans and highlight to them that this aspect's not been carried out and this is what the alternative would be. Whether we would get funding for the alternative, I don't know. We would need to but I couldn't answer that to say.
Okay, no, I appreciate that what was asked for, what was asked for, and you can't speak for Sustrans. I just wanted to make sure I properly understood that your position is. You're not saying that funding will definitely not happen. You can't say that. But what you're saying is that there was a package that was presented and that was approved and that incorporated the scheme. I understand that. But it doesn't mean that Sustrans would never fund an alternative. It's just an alternative wasn't before them.
No, I mean, they'll review the project against a lot of the 6 key principles, which, as you highlighted before, is one is about the reallocating of road space. So they'll consider these aspects when they're comparing against other projects to see what the funding. And also there's an element of reallocation of road space. It's just part of that. There's a segregated cycle, and this will be the first segregated cycle route in the Dundee area. This is a real, exemplar project that we are presenting, and that was the reason why we got the funding. But we would need to go back to Sustrans, depending on this, what the outcome is.
Okay, that's useful. Mark, do you want to comment on this question?
Very briefly, while James was speaking, just on the point of the Sustrans funding, I would just to point out that when we spoke to Sustrans about the input from local people directly living in this neighbourhood, what input they had, they referred us to the SISTRA engagement document. Now, our opinion is that there was no input sought directly from people in the neighbourhood for that. So Sustrans was relying completely on the consultation exercise undertaken by the council and had no idea till after it was put forward and passed about the extent of the local opposition to this. We would just like to make that point. And a quick question for James, if I might. We spoke about the size of the project and the need for a major category and minor or local category being set at 2 hectares. I think you said that in point 8. Given that it was raised from a category 3 to a category 4, due to high level of scrutiny that you spoke about. So even though the hectarage of the area being stocked up to you was below the criteria, should that have not been given more scrutiny given the significance of everything else that was happening? And it was a national project.
I mean, the thing what I'd like to add is that category 3 projects and category 4 projects are both highly ambitious projects. I think they're seen as kind of the same in terms of how they're progressing. The difference with the category 4 is that there is this panel meeting that we need to present as part of that, which is, and it's to do with the stage of it. I'll let Jerry come in on that as well, because obviously he was involved in the project when it was kind of moved from the category 3 to the category 4. But they are highly ambitious projects that have the same criteria, the same as you're working through the Sustrans office throughout the design development. As well through the project. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Jerry.
No, I think we've covered it, James.
Oh, okay, thank you. Another aspect I was going to ask about in relation to kind of cycling and cycling perspectives and all of this, and I was grateful to the council for sending me the link, which I watched, of the committee decision on the 6th of September. And there was a presentation that was made there by Russell Pepper. I think there's a Dundee Cycling Forum. And he said there, and I appreciate he's not speaking for the council, Ewan was at that meeting as well, and you spoke, Ewan, in answer to questions from elected members on that day. But I was interested, he said in his representation to the committee that in relation to the scheme, that the local residents who've raised the concerns here are simply wrong. They're simply mistaken. He said that it's a common thing when schemes of this nature are brought forward and people object, and the objectors are always wrong when the schemes are actually put into place and developed. So mindful, as I say, that he wasn't speaking for the council, and Ewan was at that particular meeting. I'd nevertheless just welcome the sort of council's view on this. Is it the position that the local residents are simply wrong in their objections, or is it the position that they may well have points that are validly made, but the merits and the wider justification of the scheme outweighs all of that? Or will you associate yourself with the views expressed by Mr. Pepper? And it may well be that Ewan's the best person to begin that, because you were at the meeting and I listened to what you said to elected members there that day.
Yeah, just to answer that, I don't recognise the position which Russell Pepper presented. I would note that the Dundee Cycling Forum are the principal cycling group in Dundee. They're also a campaign group as well, so they do have a skewed perspective on these things. There's 28 objections received to the stopping up order, and certainly the points which were raised were for local issues around about Mill Street, which is entirely understandable. One thing I would say is that they are quite largely based on looking at the current circumstances, and I think that's valid. I think it is valid to look at the current circumstances and have a look at the objectives of the Scottish Government with scepticism about things like 20% reduction in car kilometre traffic by the end of the decade, radical transformation, doubling the number of active travel users. But this is the purpose of the scheme. This is the purpose of the investment, and that's the purpose of the policy and the strategy. So that is what we're implementing.
Okay, now that's helpful. Thank you. I'm going to bring in Mark, and he may have had his hand up from an earlier question. But and he should feel free to make the points he wants to make in there. But I wanted to bring Mark in at this stage, and I'll bring Paul in a second. To give Mark an opportunity, just under reference to the points made by him on the interaction generally with the planning permission process and the stopping up process. And you had some concerns, you've touched on some of them already around the acreage, but you had other concerns as well. So if you want to expand, you don't feel you need to. If you want to expand on anything you've said in your statement or any other points in relation to the interaction between planning and the stopping up order, then feel free to do so at this stage.
I would just say I thank you first of all to Ewan for the comments like that, because of course we would have 28 other people and probably more in the neighbourhood who may see things differently in terms of being told that they were wrong. You know, they wouldn't have gone as far as raising objections the way they did. It's not to any way against the overall project. It's the ensuing local traffic conditions which would result. So there has to be a balance. I know that there has to be a balance between cyclists and local residents in terms of what we believe would happen as a result of a stopping up order, but I would welcome that. But it's just, we feel, just to reiterate what I said earlier, the decisions were being made before there was a realisation of the opposition locally among people, and decisions were made that things went ahead without the awareness of the level of local opposition, which was not picked up at the initial planning stage. Thank you.
Yeah, right, thank you. Looking at the agenda, I think we've probably covered the first two items in the agenda, because we moved into a discussion which I found very useful on consideration of alternatives. I was wondering now whether we could move on to the question of the adequacy of traffic impact information, road safety and the road safety analysis as on this part of the agenda. And I'd first of all, in that respect, maybe just start with the question of a road safety audit. I'm not sure. I know that often in schemes of this nature, there's a road safety audit done at present and in advance, and the point's being made, of course, we're looking at the future rather than necessarily looking at the past, because this proposal involves change, and there may well be proposals for future road safety audit. But I wondered if the council would want to say something about the steps that have been taken, and if there is a road safety audit. Again, I'm not sure that's been lodged, or we have missed it. But I wondered if a witness from the council might want to speak about the steps that were taken in relation to the road safety audit, both past and future. I think Jerry is first, quick off the mark with his hand up, so happy to get him to go on first.
So yeah, no, just to confirm that we are carrying out road safety audits at all stages of the design development. So there was initial concept design road safety audit, there was more detailed design road safety audit, and there's continued to be road safety audits for the development of the design and post-construction.
That's been an ongoing process, and that if issues arise in relation to that, that'll be continually evaluated and monitored. And we'll come to this when we talk of temporary closures as well. But one of the issues arising is the question that we are looking to the future and required to respond if some of the concerns, if the order was proceeded with, some of the concerns that are raised by local residents. It presumably is the case that a road safety audit in that respect at least would be designed to try to identify those concerns, and the council would act upon them.
That's correct. That's the purpose of the road safety audit, is to try to ensure that we build as safe a construction as possible, and to continue and to monitor it. And it's also a condition of the Sustrans funding is to continually monitor the scheme after the construction, to make sure that there's not tweaks that we can't make some improvements to if it's been missed during the development of the project and the changes for person's usage of it.
Okay, thanks. I'm bringing you in just now on that. I see Mark's got his hand up. I don't know if he wants to talk about a particular point, but okay, now bringing you in. If you could lower your hand when you've made your contribution, then I can know when you want to come in again. Thank you. Right, Ewan.
Yeah, it was just to elaborate on the road safety audit process. So there's 4 stages, principally to the road safety. The first road safety audit, stage 1, has been completed, which is on the preliminary design, and that's to principally enable things, the road orders particularly, land gap attained, so we can proceed forward with undertaking things like the stopping up order at Mill Street. Following approval of the road orders and the permissions, then it moves on to the detailed design stage, and the safety audits undertaken on the detailed design. And that'll look at more detail about things like turning heads and crossing facilities and so forth. And then following that, on the opening or on opening of the improvement, and again with these online improvements to a certain extent. The period of that, but it's on construction completion, and we undertake a stage 3 road safety audit, and then 1 year afterwards with monitoring evaluation of accident detail, and also traffic behaviour patterns. They undertake a stage 4 road safety audit. At every stage in that, the road safety auditor team will make recommendations to any problems which they identify, and corrective action will be implemented through either difficult changes or other measures. And again, that's a very standard process for all projects, all road-related projects.
I don't know, Paul or Mark, want to comment particularly on the road safety audit. I was also going to give them the chance to say anything they might want to about the absence of a traffic assessment. I've seen the explanation for that not having happened, and I wasn't going to spend time on that this morning unless either Paul or Mark think we should explore that. So primarily, I just give them the chance if they want to say anything about what's been explained by the council as to their intentions in relation to a road safety audit.
We have, throughout this, we have concerns about the timing of these, because I know it was stated in Mr. McNaughton, it's usual to undertake traffic counts in spring or summer. we've argued, and I won't go into the detail that's in the document, that's wholly underestimating how busy traffic becomes, and the photographs we submitted, which completely submit that, for example, the conditions that I have on 2 weekdays in the summer, and they're completely different to the ones that were pictured at other times that had been presented. So a question, just for Mr. McNaughton, if things became, if they became intolerable, there clearly isn't an option of unstopping up the road.
If you want to comment, or Maureen might want to comment on that as well.
Well, direct response. The question about the spring autumn periods for undertaking the traffic counts is to avoid seasonal variation. It's to get a typical or average view of traffic. There are other alternatives which are available to the council if, for instance, the traffic volume decrease, which is forecast, went the other way, and say extreme traffic volumes doubled, or alternatively, road safety concerns were identified at either the stage 2, 3, or 4 audits. There are other options to the council to make changes to the scheme, still with the stopping up at Mill Street. Principally, the main obvious one would be the reverting traffic to 2-way flow on Castle Lane. So basically having an east-west direction. We don't see that being necessary. We don't see that being advantageous, but that option would be available, and that would involve suspension of parking at Castle.
Presumably, if a decision was made to completely reopen Mill Street, presumably that could legally be done. It could just be a new road and adopted as such, if that ended up being the position in the long term, subject to what might arise. Paul.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really familiar with the detail of the traffic surveys, but I guess I don't really understand. I mean, the problem is specifically in the summer, particularly school holidays, and when the weather's good in the weekend. So the idea that you conduct a traffic survey that's almost deliberately outside of those periods of time seems self-defeating, doesn't it? And that means we don't have the data to address the problem.
I'm going to come to that a little bit later on. That's certainly on my list of questions for council officials. Ewan's answered that to a certain extent, but I've got further questions on that. But I was wanted to ask, just so I can see, as someone who doesn't know the area particularly well, just a few questions more generally to council officials, and objectors may want to comment as well. Firstly, about parking and loss of parking spaces around that area. And I'd welcome views from everybody, starting with council officials, as to whether in Broughty Ferry, more broadly, there is considered to be a parking problem or not. I visited a few weeks ago and took a wider walk around the area, but also took a drive along the east, along the Esplanade, and up round that way. But I'd welcome views of those who know the area better than me, having seen it just on one day, and on a Sunday indeed, whether it's recognised that there is or is not a broader issue with parking numbers in the town, and what the impact of the relatively marginal loss, but nevertheless a loss of parking spaces as set out in the proposal would be. But I don't know who from the council would be best to comment on that, if they're able. If not, I mean, certainly if either Paul or Mark have any opinion on the general question about problem with parking. I see Ewan's got his hand up. If Paul or Mark want to say anything first of all, then I'll come to Ewan.
Well, I would reiterate pressure on parking, given the photographs, which are typical of what happens, as Paul said, in summer conditions. There would be extreme pressure, not just there, but also in local streets. This is where many of the residents are coming from, the pressures in local streets that would be put on there, because we know that there was a two-way system. Mr. McNaughton spoke about going back to, as a last resort, almost of having to make Castle Lane two-way again, and that would be disastrous in our opinion, given the traffic flows at busy times and the pressure it would put on four-way traffic happening there. But we note that also, when that was removed, that was clearly put in there as one of the ways to offset the closing of Mill Street, which has been removed, which is putting pressure on other areas. But in terms of parking as well, I know Mr. Muller made the point about the reduction of parking, but we feel it would also not be equitable in terms of people that have to bring their cars here. There's also going to be pressure on folk with young families or disabled who are, when parking in that car park's fill up straight away, it's going to put intolerable pressure on there. And we think that's a factor to be considered as well. We don't feel it's equitable from that point of view. And a last point I would make in terms of looking at local streets, I note that Mr. McNaughton had said in his statement that he didn't anticipate that the traffic wouldn't turn westbound along Castle Street and it would continue down Brook Street. But in the actual submission, which came from the proposal from the council, which was presented at the meeting in January 21, 0.17 on the description of the councillors closing Mill Street means that westbound traffic on the Esplanade will have to use Brook Street and Castle Street to access central Broughty Ferry.
I think Paul had his hand up, then I'll bring in Ewan.
Yeah, I just going back to your original question about the nature of parking spaces, and it's kind of it's a bit of an odd place because during the week it's actually not too bad down in the area we're talking about, but it's actually out of hours and at weekends and on at holiday times when it can become really problematic quite quickly. So I'd say there's an unusual amount of variance in the parking congestion, which is perhaps not typical when you're doing parking surveys, but I think it's quite important to characterise it at the times when it's a real problem.
Thank you. And then Ewan, I think you had your hand up previously, but if you can make the points you wanted to make there and anything in response.
Yeah, thanks very much. It is quite a typical situation for a beachfront location, if you like. But the wider area, there's reasonable amount of capacity, but again, that's saturated during peak periods, is noted by Paul and Mark. It was raised during the initial consultation exercise the importance of parking. Within the conservation area, the area that we're exploring today, the reduction in parking capacity is 7%. And again, we detail that in a question and answer sheet to the 28 objectors, locating the number of parking spaces and provided further details, which were also included in the original planning application as well. On the wider point about how do you tackle it, if we accommodate parking to an extreme point of if you've got a saturation of parking problem, if you build a new car park, what you're doing is you're creating a draw demand. So parking is one of the tools available to encourage modal shift to other forms of travel. But if we accommodate parking, we're never going to decrease the number of visitors by car. And again, that's similar with other forms as well. If we continue with the predominant row space allocation being to vehicles, which represent not the greatest volume of traffic using the route, we're not going to redress and rebalance. So again, it's part of that transformational objective of the project to increase active travel journeys, and part of that's to do with permeability, prioritisation of active travel over traffic, and part of it's also to do with parking. However, as noted, the parking was raised as a very important point, and through the consultation exercise, and it has been limited to just a 7% reduction in parking.
Yeah, I think Paul wants to come back on this point.
Yeah, just a kind of more generic point, and you, I understand your job is to kind of manage this transition from people driving cars to kind of walking and riding bikes. But, and I understand there's Scottish Government objectives that are trying to be fulfilled and so on, but it seems that the way to go about that is to try and encourage people to drive cars less, rather than to almost artificially modify the road network in a way that essentially penalises the people who live there, which is going to be a byproduct of what's happening here, I think.
Okay. Thank you for all those answers. I'd just like to move on just to one or two kind of general questions, unless Mark wanted to comment again on that. Any last points on that? I think you may still be on mute.
Comment that I noted, sorry, it was Jerry when he was talking in paragraph 10, I think, about saying it would not be appropriate at this time to include any safety improvements at the locations. That just for the merit of an explanation. I mean, I'd noted down more safety issues in the hope that there's going to be less cars coming.
Jerry wants to comment about paragraph 10 of his recognition.
Yeah, that comment was made on the back of meeting a couple of residents who were complaining of what they thought the impact of our scheme was going to cause at the junction of Brook Street and Castle Street. And I met the residents there. We met at 5:30, and we stood there for 45 minutes to an hour, just discussing the scheme in general. Excuse me. The first thing to note was they weren't actually aware of the details of the scheme. They hadn't looked at our website, which was of interest to me. But their thoughts on the scheme were that it would exacerbate the problems at the Castle Street, Brook Street junction. So what I pointed out is, as we stood there, and as they pointed out to me, is as people return from work, that junction becomes busier, and cars park right up to the junction, right up to the giveaway lines, and blocking sight lines for people coming out of Castle Street in particular onto Brook Street. So what I was pointing out to them there is, we haven't built the scheme yet. This is an existing problem. Which the council I spoke to officers in the transportation who deal with that, and the council are aware of these types of problem in Broughty Ferry. Now, the normal situation would be to put double yellow lines at all junctions. Double yellow lines at all junctions would have a loss of somewhere in the region of 20 to 25 car parking spaces if they were to carry that out. So there's a balanced approach taken by the council to say, if there's not a problem, don't fix it. If it's not broken, we don't fix it, we leave it. So if that problem is exacerbated, which is already at an exacerbated position, I mean, the council could come in and take safety measures on that, but I think that would be to the detriment of the general community. As we're saying, it's peak times, it's at 6 o'clock when everyone's coming home and the streets are busy. So that was what the reference was to, is that there is existing problems there that are not being dealt with by our project, but should we exacerbate that further, then there are steps that we could take to improve the situation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I'm conscious now it's 11:30, and I said that we'd look to have a break. Paul, why don't you put your hand up, Paul? Do you want to comment last on that? And then we can take a break, perhaps, before we move on to further questions also on traffic. But Paul, first of all.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the logic there of Jerry's reply, because clearly we know going in that we're going to lose 7% of car parking spaces, so it clearly will exacerbate the problem. I'm not sure how the council is going to resolve it if there's a net loss of car parking spaces.
Right, I suggest we take a break just now. I make it just after 11:30. I suggest we come back, say 11:45. Is that enough time for a sufficient cover stop, or do you want less time, or can we suggest 1:45? If that's okay, we can
Absolutely.
close off, mute, and then close off our cameras, and then come back at 1:45. Okay, thank you. I think we're having going back except Jerry just now, so we'll give him a second. Okay, right, we can reconvene the hearing, and thank you for your contributions earlier this morning. And we're carrying on item 3 of the agenda, which is taking forward some further issues on the traffic information. And I was going to start this bit of the session, it's why I took the break when I did, by asking some general questions for someone who's not familiar with the area particularly. So they're probably daft questions, but if you could maybe bear with me while I ask them, and then we'll go into a bit more detail on the traffic information that's obtained. And first of all, I'd be quite interested in just the views that people have on general questions of travel. I'm assuming from the geography of the area that most of the travel from outside the town comes from the Dundee area. But I'm interested, whoever can answer this question best, is if you're coming from Dundee now to spend the afternoon at the Esplanade area and going to the Mill Street car park, what is the route that you would now go in order to get to Mill Street car park? And what will be the route that we use in future if you're coming from Dundee, first of all, to get to the Mill Street car park? I don't know who's best to just walk me through that journey that you'd make if you're coming by car from Dundee. Yeah.
I can tell you, right? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know the first. I think Mark and Paul may have a bit of local insight as to what you do. But,
So I don't know if you've got a map of the area. So Broughty Ferry is on the east side of Dundee. So the predominant population of Dundee is to the west.
Sure.
So traffic coming from Dundee comes from the west. So they obviously come for a number of routes to get to Broughty Ferry, but predominantly it's coming from the west end.
Yeah.
So the two entry points would be the Dundee Road at the very west end of Douglas Terrace. They would come over Dundee Road and come down onto Brook Street. Brook Street is the main road through Broughty Ferry. It's the main shopping street in Broughty Ferry. So if you come into the Broughty Ferry at the Dundee Road Bridge, you would travel through the main shopping centre. If you were purely wanting to come to the beachfront, then you would stay on the main Dundee to Arbroath Road and you would continue along to St Vincent Street. St Vincent Street is a controlled traffic light junction, which then would take you into Broughty Ferry.
Okay.
And when you arrive, come over, the first junction you meet is the junction with Brook Street again. So you would then turn left onto Brook Street to go along to the Esplanade. So that would be your direction into the Esplanade and the beachfront.
That's fine. To what extent would that, in your estimation, change once the proposals are implemented, as they are?
None of that would change, because effectively what we are doing is we are changing the exit from the Esplanade. So that would always be your entry point, whether we changed the Mill Street or not. There's Mill Street's a one-way road in the opposite direction.
And the same question then, if you're once you've had your day in Broughty Ferry, when you're returning to Dundee, what will be the route that you take at present, and what would your anticipation be of the route you take in future?
So the route would be the opposite of what I've described, albeit the current route on Mill Street allows rat runs to use the back streets in Broughty Ferry to miss out a lot of the main road traffic. So that's the alternative at the moment, is Mill Street gives you a rat run.
And that takes you around Mill Street.
It takes you around Mill Street onto King Street, then as a dead end at the end, and so you have to then exit King Street at any point. You can go south onto Douglas Terrace, or you can go north onto Brook Street and up onto the main Dundee road.
Okay, thank you. And I'll bring in Mark, then Paul, as being people who are could bring their local knowledge just to give their comments on those same questions. Mark, first of all. I'll mute. Go up mute, Mark.
Just to think, the points are well made about how traffic would come in. The concern is about exit and the pressure it would then put on the surrounding roads at peak times. I know we keep banging this drum, but we feel there's a significant difference in peak traffic times that aren't being addressed by the timing of the surveys.
Come to that, Mark, in a few moments.
The pressure would then be on the surrounding roads, but they would certainly come back again. The only exit would be coming back down Brook Street. And then that junction, as I don't know if you drove under it, where going under the railway bridge, but it is narrow and does get extremely busy at peak times, which we feel would be added to.
Okay, thank you. And Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really compromise coming in, as others have said. The compromise is in going out, because there are essentially three parallel roads which run the length of Broughty Ferry parallel to the river. There's King Street, there's Brook Street, and then there's the main Arbroath Road. And the one in the middle, Brook Street, is one way for most of it.
Yeah.
So traffic is now going to be forced back along Brook Street and is going to have to turn it off before it reaches the one-way point. And there are really, I think, two exits onto the main road. One is onto St Vincent Street, which is already quite a difficult street because of the low bridge. What Mill Street currently allows you to do is go all the way along King Street. And that has somewhere in the region of 5 or 6 different streets that you can then navigate your way out of Broughty Ferry along Castle Terrace, or you can bypass the one-way section of Brook Street. So it actually does, I think, reduce the number of exit paths considerably. I personally go along Mill Street. It's one of the reasons I'm kind of frustrated by this. I go along Mill Street and then I go all the way along King Street, and that's essentially going to be removed as an option. So the kind of circulatory nature of coming in along Brook Street and then going out along King Street is going to evaporate as part of this exercise.
Yeah. And I take it again, I'm addressing this to Mark and Paul particularly because of the local residents. I noticed when I visited that Brook Street at one point in the middle was one way, and was one way towards the east, I think. I don't know if you have any views as to whether the fact that it's one way at that stage has any impact, further down, at the Esplanade on kind of traffic implications further down, or is that just too distant to be relevant to what we're looking at today?
I mean, I think what it does is it just, if you travel back along Brook Street to get out of Broughty Ferry, you can't go all the way, right? So you really got to turn right at St Vincent Street or at the level crossing, both of which are already pinch points. And I'd imagine that will be more of a problem if your alternative access via King Street is removed.
Okay, thank you.
And I would concur with that. It's the pressure that will be put on surrounding streets as well, which are not designed for being able to cope. at peak times, there'd be an extreme build-up of traffic. From experience of driving here, I would concur with what Paul is saying. It's removal of an exit route where there are not that many options.
Okay, well, that quite neatly perhaps takes us into the traffic data that's been compiled and has been lodged by the council. And I don't know who is best placed to talk me through that, but I just wonder, I've got a 4-page document which shows the dates and the sampling that was taken in April and May of last year. And I wonder if one of the council officials would just care to just walk me through these figures from the baseline and what the implications of the various options are. I see the figures in front of me, and I see references to the ratio flow to capacity. But I just wondered if you maybe sort of talk me through. I know traffic analysis is notoriously complex, but talk me through this so I can get an understanding of what these figures actually mean and what they tell me. And then if Mark and Paul want to ask questions about the specific figures themselves, they can do so. And I see Ewan has boldly put his hand up.
Oh, good morning. So yeah, as noted in the documents you're referencing, they've taken the 2nd of May peak time hour for the traffic data which has been modelled. And again, not to reiterate what I previously mentioned, but it is normal that we do traffic counts, both the councils and the planning applications which we generally assess, which involve traffic assessments as well. This is the same process that's undertaken in the traffic assessments, which we when we require them for new developments, things like new housing estates with 200-300 houses or a new Tesco store and things like that. It's the same process. So yeah, the first column, if you like, the base flow column, that's reporting on 3 junctions which are assessed. The first one being the Esplanade at Brook Street, the second one being Brook Street at Castle Street, and then the third one at Brook Street, St Vincent Street. It hasn't gone further past St Vincent Street because at that point the traffic dissipates with a number of different routes. To go further than that, we get into wider, what we call parametric modelling, so city-wide modelling, to try and work out destinations for all traffic. It moves from being a local, if you like, to a wider, and it comes down to a proportionality, which follows the guidelines, proportional assessments for the type of development. The option plus with layout change is moving the traffic, which the peak hour traffic going westbound, which I can't remember the exact figure, I think it was 100 and something other vehicles an hour. It's moving that on to the Brook Street route essentially, and it's assessing the differential in queue time and traffic delay, which would result from that increased traffic based on the traffic level identified on the 2nd of May peak hour last year. Just for the benefit, the junctions are all unsignalised, so they're priority junctions, and the queuing and delay are both intrinsically linked, but it's to do with turning traffic, particularly right turning traffic, where it has to stop and wait for a gap in the traffic. So that's what causes the queuing and that's what causes the delay. So for the Brook Street and Esplanade junction, the one at the seafront, that actually receives an improvement in journey time.
Assuming the negative figure in terms of junction delay represents an improvement.
Yeah, very peculiar, but the real reasons for that is because you've got less right turning traffic going down the Esplanade westbound because it's closed. So that makes it easier for the right turning traffic coming off the Esplanade going up Brook Street or vice versa, coming eastbound on the Esplanade going up Brook Street. It makes it easier for the turn. So you've got a slight improvement in both queue length and delay on that junction. The next one up, the Brook Street Castle Street junction, It's got a third of a second delay implication there, and just as you mentioned there, the RFC number, the ratio to flow capacity, it is what it says on the tin effectively. So it's looking at the capacity of the junction. For prioritised unsignalised junctions, they tend to experience operational difficulty when they get to 85% or 0.85%. A figure, so we're well beneath that on both the base and the option plus, and effectively there's no difference in the capacity for that junction.
Yeah.
The last one, the next one up, the Brook Street St Vincent Street junction. Again, it's got some minor increases on the capacity of the junction from the additional traffic volume, and again it incorporates a half a second delay. But again, when we look at the option plus figures there, they're all well beneath the 0.85 operational capacity, where we start to consider it being an operational difficulty. In terms of operational difficulty, if we did experience operational difficulty, for example, during the stage 4 road safety audit or traffic monitoring, we have options that we can put in place. The first starting point would probably be to signalise these junctions. Again, with the forecast that we're looking at, we're not expecting that to be necessary. And secondly, the last point probably to make on this as well is that these figures are based on low decrease. So this is based on an at present scenario. So we've not modelled in any forecast decrease in traffic as part of this assessment. This is based on the traffic as it was in May last year.
Okay, that's useful. And as you said, I think they are all unsignalled junctions that have been assessed here. So I think I take from what you're saying is that the delays that are occurring are the right turning delays, where because of the narrowness of the streets, and some are narrower than others. I know Castle Street is very narrow, Brook Street less so, but still, if you've got a vehicle coming along Brook Street doing a right turn into Castle Street, that would block the whole carriageway until an opportunity is free for it to make that right turn. That's presumably what represents the junction delay on the figures there, is how I'm interpreting that, if that's correct.
That's a correct basis. The quite detailed the way that they do it, so they actually work out the queuing capacity for the types of vehicle as well, so it can work out how many queuing vehicles that you require before you actually start to impede flow. So basically, one car or two cars or three cars before it will block the flow of traffic, and then we'll have to wait for somebody to actually turn off.
Yeah. And 0.85 is the level at which you begin to cause you concern. I guess in one sense, a bit like the R number in COVID, my understanding is that once you're above 1, then the junction can't cope. And you need to you definitely need to take measures to address it there.
We call it consideration of operational difficulty. There's a number of junctions in Dundee unsignalised that have got RFC figures above 0.85%. So again, from existing conditions. Certainly, we're more looking at this if we were making a change. So again, I'll draw a comparison because it's the same exercise we do for developments. If we were building a new 400 house estate, which is going to generate 200 traffic movements at peak time, and that was forecasting that we were going to top, sort of 0.85, 0.9% capacity, then we'd look to signalise the junction. However, we have got other junctions unsignalised. Some of our single carriageway routes featuring unsignalised junctions have got up to 25,000-30,000 vehicles per day. So it's not uncommon that we do exceed this in Dundee anyway.
Okay. Yes, I'm realising as you gave your answer that I'm probably making something of a generalisation across the steps that we're taking. But nevertheless, presumably your evidence is that what this shows is that the roads have adequate capacity to deal with the changes that you're proposing. And in that respect, I wonder, is there a difference between road capacity and congestion? Or do you think, because the objection, many of the objections, understandably, are not couched in terms of a critique of the actual figures, talk in terms of the sense of congestion, or is road capacity and congestion effectively a kind of different way of expressing the same thing?
Yeah, I think that's Fair point. Yeah, it's one and the same. And again, due to the road network being predominantly unsignalised junctions in the area, it is these issues of more vehicles, the turning, queuing, and that gives you the standstill. So it's I would term congestion as a combination of journey time delay and queuing traffic.
Yeah. Okay. And moving on to the questions that I think both Paul and Mark had raised earlier on about the timings of the carrying out of these assessments. I mean, the numbers, the times the assessment was made and the timings of them kind of speak for themselves. One of them was on a Sunday, and I know that one of the suggestions is that for an area that is recreational use, a Sunday use is likely to be the peak. Now, you answered the question earlier on the question of the industry norm of doing these samples in the spring or the autumn to avoid seasonal blips. But I kind of had the same question that Paul and Mark have asked. Is that may be true in kind of normal circumstances, but here we have an area which is designed for and designed in future because of this to attract additional recreational use, and therefore the point arises as to whether figures should be taken over a kind of summer period and school holiday periods, because you're actually wanting to combat the worst. So while yes, you would normally want to smooth something out over the year, but what consideration was given to the question of taking samples at that more peak time of year? How confident can you be that the figures you produced are robust, given the points made about the seasonal use, given the nature of the esplanade and the castle green development?
Yeah, to reiterate, the reason that they do the traffic surveys in spring and autumn, and again, I'd say this is consistent with the ones that we receive, we accept, and we approve for private developments throughout as well. They're done to avoid seasonal peaks. And again, it's a couple of aspects on this. One, we do have an existing road network which we're adapting. The second point as well is that we're not advocating building dual carriageways to the beachfront to accommodate peak level traffic demand on a Saturday afternoon. So again, it's a combination of these factors. The basis of the project is to reduce traffic. Again, I can't really strongly reiterate that point enough, that we're not trying to accommodate increases in traffic. We're trying to lower traffic. We're trying to get more people visiting the area by sustainable transport means, which are quite well served in the area within a kilometre, with bus routes to all areas, the train station. And again, this will be the final piece in the puzzle, if you like, for the active travel improvements to get that greater forecast. Again, as I say, at the moment, we have the predominant prioritisation to motor vehicle traffic, which doesn't, as it stands, represent the highest form of mode of transport to the location. Yeah, it's in contrast to the Scottish Government's policy objectives in that regard. And it's again, it's the forecast modelling as well to increase active travel by 127% as a result of this project.
Yeah. But again, it goes back to that question, and I'll come to the objectors in a moment for if they've got anything further on this. But it goes back to that question. You'll see the photographs that Mark has submitted, and he makes the point that many of these difficulties arise in the summer months. So I suppose the question really, I guess, is what are the objectives to make? What am I to make of the mismatch between the sort of figures that are produced on the technical analysis here and the kind of lived experiences of residents in the area, particularly, as I say, at periods of peak time, which these samples were not taken at.
Yeah, I mean, in response to that, I'm not sure if it's a question traffic modelling can answer. It's probably more of a societal question about what we're looking to achieve. If we want to accommodate vehicle traffic, then we wouldn't be doing this project. That's quite simple. It's not designed with that objective. in mind. That said, as I did mention earlier, we do have options which, if they become problematic, or if there's a change in policy direction, we could implement to improve traffic permeability, traffic flow, traffic congestion. If that were to experience problems, some of those are by reinstating a two-way flow on the on Castle Lane. In addition, we can also look at putting in signalised junctions in any of the junctions, and make improvements in that regard as well. We don't see it being necessary at the moment, which is the reason why it's not promoted.
So again, the road safety audit and continued evaluation is your position, how you'd respond to these situations when they would arise. But I guess my specific question, before I come to the objectors, is given the absence of summer modelling on this, are you satisfied that in the absence of that data, the closure can safely proceed? If anybody wants to answer that question specifically. Well, we come back to that then. In that case, I'll move on to, I'll have Paul first of all, then Mark.
Yeah, so to make sure I understand Ewan, what you said. I mean, if I understand rightly, you recognise that there's a lot more traffic in the summer, but you don't think it's germane to the issue to evaluate it because it's not kind of part of the philosophical construct of enhanced bicycle travel. But I think that's what the fundamental problem here is for the residents, because while we understand the whole philosophical thing about people moving on to bikes, we've got to live in the area, and choosing not to address the issue of traffic and congestion when it's at its worst in the summer, and just saying we'll kind of let the chips fall where they may, doesn't seem satisfactory to me.
And Mark?
I would reiterate, I would say, given the unique nature of Broughty Ferry within Dundee, because it is a destination becoming increasingly popular, and by this design, it is looking to bring more people into the area, and realistically, they will bring cars with them, and therefore I would suggest on this occasion it would be far more expedient to have surveys done which would take in these periods where traffic's at its heaviest, because there is a complete contrast, as we've said before, and ascertain that before doing this. And to pick up one of the things like maybe bringing Castle Lane back, I mean, that was one of the reasons, that was one of the biggest objections that I had. I mean, to have traffic then going two-way on Castle Lane along the Esplanade, approaching from both directions from King Street on a blind corner into Castle Street, and Castle Street going west, all within the vicinity of an area with a new crossing to the car park. I don't think that would be a solution that would be better dealt with beforehand rather than having to come to that.
Thank you. Maureen's your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's really not so much a matter for myself, but just to be clear that the council's position is, and my understanding that the council's position is, and I think colleagues would confirm this, is that the industry norm and that which is expected of us in terms of traffic assessment has been complied with. Now, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Kett, in terms of a summer analysis, but this would not be the only project that might have heightened congestion or traffic issues at certain times. It won't be exceptional in that regard, and the industry norm is that these matters are dealt with an attempt to level it out. And I think that, just to confirm that the council's position is that the analysis and the traffic analysis that has been carried out is the appropriate and required traffic analysis, and does indicate that the stopping up of Mill Street and the the 20 metres from Castle Lane westwards would adequately be dealt with. Traffic issues are adequately dealt with by the assessment or analysis that has already been carried out, and that there would not be any further need to assess that in summer for two reasons. One, because we meet the requirements in terms of what is necessary, in terms of what has already been carried out, and two, because as Mr McNaughton has indicated, the intent and purpose, and one of the driving factors behind this, is to look at active travel, to enhance placemaking. These are two of the significant elements in respect of this application, and neither of these can be achieved or will be achieved if emphasis was placed on. We've heard much about car parking, we've heard much about congestion, but it is that balance, and it is certainly the council's position that the findings of the traffic analysis, the road safety audit, and these issues have been properly considered, both at the planning stage and again at the stopping up stage, and certainly been considered by councillors. The evidence has been presented to them both at the planning committee and again at various stages in the stopping up application. And it would certainly be the council's position that there is no need for further analysis. Indeed, it would be inappropriate to conduct a further analysis in summer months where the results then would be skewed, and that we would in essence be attempting to address a slightly different situation in terms of parking. Much as we've already heard that objections have been accommodated in respect of parking, and it is that balance in terms of the project, and it is respectfully submitted that the traffic analysis for carried out as and when it was in April and May properly addresses the issues that arise in terms of congestion and traffic flow.
Well, presumably your position is not that an alternative time for testing these things would be an exceptional set of circumstances in itself. Obviously, there can be one-offs where there'd be extra traffic demand, and you could see why you wouldn't do sampling to meet that. But of course, summer happens every year, and I guess that would be the point of saying, although that wouldn't be the normal recommended standard for the industry requirement. It's where the peak is because of the particular nature of the use of the area here. But your position is that you've met industry requirements and therefore need to do no more.
I think that is exactly right, in the sense that the peak is not what we would be looking to address. Whenever that peak would occur, be that peak at Christmas, be it whatever period, there will be different peaks and different developments, and we would never be seeking to address the peak. That's not a lack of recognition that there is a peak or that other matters might be required to address those situations when the peak arises. It's simply to say that it is not the purpose and intent of traffic analysis to address a situation at its peak.
Okay. I'll get Jerry with his hand up, then I'll come back to the objectors on this point.
It was just to reiterate something that you did say earlier as well, is that these traffic figures were used as they are. They weren't simulated to what the project would envisage to change in the scheme, because the project's design is to reduce the number. So if we were to add a simulation, it wouldn't matter what time of year we did a traffic count. The simulation would be that the numbers at that point in time would be less because of the project. It's the opposite. Is we're not providing a Tesco superstore which is going to attract more. We're providing, the project is to provide an alternative means of access to the route. So the simulation would be based on lesser numbers than that. So
yeah, so it's modelling rather than a forecast, I suppose, is what you're saying. You're not saying this is what will happen when you change it, because it hasn't happened yet. But it's modelling that is presumably the best evidence you think that can be obtained in accordance with industry standards to meet that requirement. Is that a fair summary? Okay, anything else from Paul or from Mark on this point? I think I understand the issues that have been raised by both of you, but also the council response. But is there anything else you want to say about the traffic figures?
No, I would just say briefly that it was worth noting that when we got into May, into late spring, that the trips per hour that were recorded were exceeded. So it was interesting to see the way the trend of traffic was beginning to happen at that time. And I take on board, comments were made about balance and active travel, but there's also got to be consideration of residents living in the area as well and the potential effects that's going to have. And I would reiterate that given the unique and the increasing amount of visitors we're going to get, and who will come by car, that I think circumstances on this occasion may call for expediency in terms of when surveys are done or a more prolonged period.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is access to emergency vehicles, which obviously is not unrelated to the topic we're discussing just now. This is something that I think, Mark, you've raised in your submission in relation to the concerns that residents have about response times. Emergency services issues were also raised by Jane Begg in her objection. That's at page 15 of the objector documentation, and by Hugh Begg on page 36 of his. And I first of all give Mark the opportunity, if he wants to say anything further. He can rest on what he said in his submission, but whether there's anything he wants to say further in relation to that, and then seek views from the council on the general issue. And I know it was dealt with in the Q&A, the general issue in relation to emergency response times.
I would say just briefly that, I have had contact from 2 residents who would be willing to submit something to yourself if required. And it was really an example of where there was a very serious incident, and at a time when traffic, this was about 4 years ago, traffic was at its peak. And I know that vehicles would not normally want to exit emergency vehicles using Mill Street, but on this occasion they had to because of the congestion of traffic. And it's just to say that, we have to consider how things may pan out in peak time. I know that emergency services were consulted, but then would a model be done for how things might, as happened on this occasion, with 2 residents happened when the other exit, which would no longer be available coming out of the ferry, was available to them and was used. And in one case was resulted in someone arriving within the appropriate time at hospital, and it was touch and go. And all we were saying is traffic going in the other direction on a busy period of peak time may have resulted in that. It was 1 incident or 2 incidents I have here, but it's still a consideration and it's a factor for response times.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if one of the witnesses for the council wants to say anything about response times and the issues raised, and perhaps also expressly deal with the point that Hugh Begg made about the emergency services, where he was asking whether HM Coast Guard have an interest in this and whether they were consulted.
In terms of the statutory consultations, I believe the Coast Guard are a statutory consultee. I would need to check that, but I don't think they are. What I would say is, though, that the emergency service betas are all located to the west of this scheme, so including the Coast Guard. So attendance to an emergency isn't going to be delayed by the result of the stopping up of the westbound. So anyone attending is going to be coming from the west heading eastbound. Will not be the traffic won't change from that point of view. The circumstance of emergency response heading returning to base, probably most acutely with ambulances, I would imagine being the predominant cause. Needing to return to Nine Wells Hospital, exiting the quickest route is via Brook Street, rather than back along the coastal route, if you like. So we're not foreseeing any delay from that point of view. And as noted, we didn't receive any objections in from any of the statutory consultees from this.
Okay, thank you. And Jenny?
It's just worth pointing out that should it be an absolute extreme emergency and if Brook Street was saturated, that Castle Lane, whilst being a one lane south, should also be used by an emergency service vehicle, and as they do on a number of occasions that they could go against the flow of traffic.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on more widely to consultation issues that have arise in a number of respects, and I think they're identified in the agenda. The ones there we'll deal with in detail specifically. But there strikes me on the whole consultation exercise I kind of a sense from a number of objectors, not just those present today, of a kind of a general dissatisfaction. And there's some detailed criticism made as well, but a general kind of level of dissatisfaction that the views of local residents who know the area best are being ignored or not sufficiently weighted in the decision-making process, and that the views of others, some of whom have a sectoral interest, some of whom don't, have had greater weight. I guess at a sort of general level, I'd welcome views in the council of that kind of sense. It comes out from a number of objectors that the sense of that arose. I don't know if there's anything that council officials want to say about that just specific general point before we get into any more detailed issues. Maureen?
Yeah, just to say in terms of the consultation processes that have been undergone, certainly from a legal statutory perspective, all of the requirements required of us have been complied with. And I note from one of the objectors and the objector's written statement that there's a suggestion that the council's been overly legalistic in terms of their approach to consultation. But to be fair, as a statutory body, we are required to meet certain criteria. And it's not something that hasn't been considered in the past. The issue of 20 metres in consultation and notification of planning applications, for example, this is something that occurs and has been raised before about whether the council should go further than that. But to be fair to planning colleagues, certainly it's always been legal advice that we adhere to that which we are required to do as a matter of law. And the reason for that is because where do we stop? Do we stop at 25? Do we stop at 26? Do we stop at 30 metres? Do we stop in what application do we apply an extended consultation? And when we don't apply an extended consultation, are we subject to judicial review of our decision by others who might have an interest if we go beyond what the legal requirements are? So there has never been a desire on the part of the local authority, I think, certainly as far as the early stages of the proposal is concerned. I don't think I've ever seen so much attempts to consult in a proposal than where at this stage. So certainly the legal requirements have all been attended to, and I think that's the appropriate thing for a statutory body to an appropriate way for the statutory body to operate. The other thing I would say to that is that the objections and just again in the statement, and the objectors themselves would have been in attendance. The objections were raised at the planning committee and were heard at the planning committee. And Mr. Conway met some of the objectors, as he's alluded to, subsequent to that planning committee meeting. Also, in terms of the consultation process for the stopping up order, I think we were aware that there were 28 objections lodged and received and considered in full. And you yourself, Mr. Cadet, have referred to the 55 pages of objections that were attached to the report that went to committee on 6 September 2021 and were duly considered. And again, you've listened to the meeting, the committee meeting that was recorded. And these objections were all before the local members, and they have had the opportunity to look at them. I'm not quite sure. I understand and I appreciate, I agree that there seems to be a perception of a failing in the consultation process, but from a legal perspective and from the council's perspective, it's difficult to see what more we could have done. And consulting does not, unfortunately, always mean for those consulted that the outcome they desire is achieved. But consulting has been carried out in this project, and I think has been carried out in a fulsome manner.
Yeah. That's useful, thank you. One of the things that struck me listening into the committee consideration on 6th September, as per the link that you were sent to me, is that one of the local elected members just didn't make the point of the importance of kind of liaising with and bringing local residents with you. They're the people who are most directly affected the whole year round by the proposals, and the importance of engagement is obviously quite significant. I think Ewan responded to that on the day on that occasion. So I understand all of that. I mean, presumably, whatever the outcome in relation to the stopping up order, the proposal for the development of the whole Castle Green as it goes forward, and we've heard about road safety audits and other things, that will continue to have that level of engagement to ensure that kind of local concerns, as appropriate, I take the point about there's limits to what can be done, and risks in doing so will be considered. So if Maureen, you want to come back on that, and then I'll go to Mark and Paul.
Yeah, but just say, Mr. Kett, you will be aware that the convener actually at the start of that meeting and the consideration of that report on the September 6th indicated, I think, that he thought that there had been a significant consultation process undertaken in respect of this. And I appreciate Councillor Duncan did raise the point that you're making. I think convener also indicated that he thought that it was an excellent proposal being consulted widely on.
Well, yes, indeed. Okay, Paul, next.
Just to point out, and this is not a general criticism, and I'm sure the consultation process was, per the standards it's meant to be. But I live within 20 metres at one Castle Terrace. I was never notified of anything. The only way I found out about it was when a neighbour put a slip of paper through my letterbox. So that's just one point. I don't know if maybe I'm just unique and that was unlucky, and I accepted that. Sometimes happens. But more broadly, I don't know if that was a problem. And then secondly, it just seems like that Castle Terrace area was going to be affected disproportionately by this whole procedure and the stopping up order. And I understand that you just can't notify everyone, that would be an all-consuming task. But it seems that in this case, it must have been pretty obvious that the people who lived in that particular location were going to be disproportionately affected by it and should have been consulted more heavily. It seems like a lot of the consultation was with larger organisations, community councils, cycling groups, whereas the local resident component of it was kind of an afterthought.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I think what the point was, we did go to the meeting and were able to raise them, but a lot of decisions had been reached via things like the SISTRA engagement document. And our point was that there'd been no direct input from people who were going to be most affected by this. We didn't dispute the vast array of folk that were consulted, but when a decision to then formally go ahead with it, which gave us very little time to respond to it, which we did do, and it was noted that the councillors, did take it on board about consulting with local communities. Ostensibly, the communication or the subsequent meetings with Jerry were really about the Castle Terrace gates, which was something of a separate issue. But, I think the feeling was that a lot of the emphasis in the SISTRA document, when you read it, was talking to people coming from further afield, visitors, cyclists, and that the people who were most affected by these decisions had been left out and had therefore had no input or been able to make any influence on what went forward, and we're basically playing catch up since. That was really, we don't dispute the extent of the consultation. It was just that it missed out, particularly those who you'll have seen from the objections, Brook Street, people in other areas who are going to be directly affected by this.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask and move on to a question about a more specific aspect of the consultation process. And again, I've wrestled to kind of fully understand this. I'm open to correction if I've not quite got this right. And that is that there were some changes made between the initial consultation and the ultimate adoption of the proposal. And as I understand it, the most important, it may not have been the only one, the most important change was the initial proposal as to what to do with Castle Lane, which is one way just now. The proposal was it was to move to two-way, and post-consultation, it's now reverted to one way going south. And I think from what I saw, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the original proposal to accommodate two-way traffic involved a roundabout, or a mini roundabout, at the junction of Castle Street and Castle Lane. But I wonder if council officials could first of all confirm what were the changes that happened between consultation first time round and the second time round, and whether it's regarded as the objectors mainly seem to feel that the most important, most significant change was that change to revert to the status quo on Castle Lane. And Maureen's got her hand up.
Yeah, it's just to be clear that at this stage we're talking about the consultation for the planning consent rather than for the stopping up order, because that was an issue for the planning consent rather than stopping up.
Right. Okay. No, I hadn't appreciated that distinction, but so that was in terms of planning consent that related to. Okay, that's very helpful. But were there any changes then made after the consultation process related to stopping up order?
No, that I'm aware of. I don't think my colleagues can. No, that I'm aware of. No.
Right. That's very useful. That was a distinction that I hadn't fully appreciated. So that's useful from that perspective. And the other thing I'd raised on the agenda were the question of the views of the Broughty Ferry Community Council. Now, in light of the concerns that were raised and references made to them, I felt it would be better if they were alerted to the fact that comments have been made about the Community Council, and so they were invited to attend this meeting and invited to make representations in relation to the matters before me. The Community Council decided that they didn't want to attend at the meeting today, but have lodged a document dated the 7th of March, which represents their position. So unless, and I guess it's down to the objectors really, unless there's anything they want to say about the position of the Community Council, which was touched on in earlier objections, I wasn't intending today to go into any more detail. The Community Council put their position on the record in their letter of 7th of March, which is uploaded onto the DPA case management system. And I think sets out their position reasonably clearly. So I wasn't intended to explore that any further. But I see Mark's got his hand up. I had no other questions on the consultation process, but I can bring in Mark just now for any points he wants to make.
It was just to touch on it. It was a point that Craig had made in paragraph 8 about when he became involved at the formal process on 17th September and 1st of October. Broughty Ferry Council had actually stated to Dundee City Council that the council should consider a neighbour notification, among other things, and that didn't transpire. That was really the root of the problem, and the feeling that we hadn't been consulted at that point. I wonder if
there's anything you want to say.
Yeah, no, I think we're just, broadly speaking, I think the Community Council, along with several other consultees and local residents through the process of the application, had raised concerns with things, mainly parking, but other elements. We had, after the initial consultations, initial feedback from the Community Council, reviewed the plans. We'd looked to retain and increase more parking than there had been in the initial layouts. Part of that involved changing Castle Lane to retain some of the parking. And I think it's outlined on the committee report, etc. The overall parking numbers that we were going to be retaining, 7.82, which is outlines where we got to with the overall figures. The discussions with the Community Council, again, were in line with what's required for the planning application. So they've submitted comments, they gave them consideration, but as I've outlined in the statement, we didn't feel it necessary to re-notify neighbours specifically on the planning application. The changes primarily to road routes and parking spaces being a matter for roads rather than the planning applications to consider.
So when the Community Council suggested neighbour notification, you didn't consider, or it wasn't deemed necessary at that time?
That would be re-notification, and no, it wasn't necessary at that time, no, because that was after the initial consultations in August.
It was just, I'd written down why was that not taken up at their suggestion.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it's already covered, yeah, we've done what was required in terms of the legislation, and there was discussions, correspondence, if you like, at that time with community councils, with consultees, with people that had objected and raised concerns, and there was the ongoing back and forth, but yeah, specific re-notification wasn't considered necessary at that time.
By way of explanation, I'll just be very brief, was that I think the problem was that one of the residents had communicated with the community council and had indicated a number of concerns that were raised, and perhaps naively we thought there was going to be a response which didn't happen. And then, when I'd read that statement, it was just that we felt they hadn't been responded to, which is why they had raised the point about the community council. So this happened, as far as we were concerned, without any comeback that we had until such time as we were able to go to the full planning committee. Thanks for
that, but yeah, we obviously just get the formal correspondence back from the community council that takes on board what they feels, yeah, their position and what they've chosen to include and put forward.
Okay, I think Paul's raised his hand again.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. It's not really about the community council, but just before we kind of move on, we talked a bit about the modification to the plans for Castle Lane, and
Yes.
and originally it was a two-way.
Yeah.
In the initial submission. So obviously at that point there was a recognition that there was some value to a western exit to the Esplanade. And then I'm not quite sure why, but that disappeared. But there was no replacement western exit. So I just wanted to ask, or go via you, Paul, why was it the original plan recognised there was a need for that, and then it was taken away and never replaced with anything?
And we can answer that question.
I think as Maureen says, that there was no changes to the design at planning stage. The designers had considered alternative options, as we do without any scheme. The option of using Castle Lane in particular received a number of negative comments on safety grounds from the road safety audit team. We did look at putting a mini roundabout in there, and that was going to exacerbate the loss of parking. But primarily we were unable to satisfy the road safety audit team that we could satisfactorily provide a two-lane entry and exit from Castle Lane.
And it'd be difficult making that an option, as per earlier comments, if other means had to be looked at, if the stopping up was not proving successful, that would be an option. That would surely rule that out then as an option for going forward, for alleviating any traffic congestion which might arise.
I guess you have to look at everything at the time you're looking at it. So the preferred option for the project is to have completely off-road cycle route. The Castle Lane option did not give an off-road cycle route, and it created dangerous situations at the junction with Castle Street. So the option when the option came around that we could have a totally off route through Mill Street and through the Castle Green, then that became the preferred option.
I wasn't being clear. I was just making the point when it was mentioned earlier in the meeting about that Castle Lane being remade two-way could be a potential solution if traffic conditions became difficult and the road was stopped up. That then would surely rule that out as a potential solution if there were road safety issues there. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Ewan, I think you want to get your hand up.
Yeah, it was just a comment that the two issues with making Castle Lane two-way streets, one the parking issues, and secondly Castle Street Junction. So we considered if we were to look at that in the future, which is a hypothetical, something that we're not seen as being required, making Castle Street over the section between Brook Street and King Street one way eastbound. But again, that's not something we're forecasting being required.
Yes, okay. Okay. As I say, those are the points I had on consultation. Smart, want to come back on that, or
No. Thank you for bringing it. As I say, it was just an explanation that we felt things had gone to a certain stage before we realistically were able to have any input into that, and there was a shortened period of time between then and the planning meeting, but we've covered all of that, and I know that in what was sent to you that's explained fully.
And I should just record, and I think Maureen's answer covers this. There were also objections from Anne Greenway, Sheila Stoker, and Hugh Begg also on the question of adequacy of consultation. And unless you want to add anything in relation to that specifically, I think Maureen, your points you made earlier on, I think that's probably applicable to those objections as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. In which case, I'll move on to the question of temporary closure. And again, my first question on the sort of temporary closure option, I mean, it'll obviously be useful to set out what the council position is. But my question for Maureen, first of all, is that on the legal aspects of temporary closure, are there issues that the council had in mind in relation to the powers, at least under the planning legislation, to do a temporary closure? One of the possibilities was doing experimental closure, and just from my own satisfaction, I don't know if you'd reached a view as to whether the powers you have under Section 207 and 208 allow for a temporary closure, or whether you'd have to use other powers, and if so, whether you think you've got adequate powers to do a temporary closure, if that was otherwise desired and desirable from a policy perspective.
Yeah, that isn't something we would consider under Section 207 and 208 of the planning legislation. I think that one of the reasons that we just determined to stop up under 207 and 208 is because of the planning consent, obviously, that's in place. We haven't considered, because temporary closure, and my colleagues will address this, is not something that the council would consider to be an expedient or helpful exercise. It's not something we would have considered under any other powers.
Okay, well, thank you. And then moving to effectively policy officials, what is the council's position on temporary closure?
I can answer that. We have powers to implement temporary traffic regulation orders, road closures, and there's a number of set criteria for situations where you can do that. Experimental orders isn't one of them. That said, with specific regard to Mill Street, during the time with the works ongoing to the west, where we've been developing flood prevention works adjacent to the site, and again to the east as well, we had a temporary closure on for quite a long time on the Esplanade. The final point I would make is with specific regard to the Esplanade closure, because it is pertinent. That was closed under powers for public spacing, so social distancing during the pandemic, a health emergency provision. It wasn't well received, and again, the main points of objection which led to its removal was without making any physical changes to the road layout. It's difficult to actually understand why you've done it. It just appears that you've shut a road for no purpose. In a broad sense, people can understand if you're resurfacing the road or if you're laying a pipe, but if you're just shutting the road for no apparent reason, it's quite a difficult sell or for people to understand. And I think that would have been the case with an experimental order on Mill Street. Again, in terms of usage, if you're not actually changing the layout, you're not really foreseeing that there's going to be any change to it. And to make significant changes to the road layout to accommodate it, so moving the car park access, removing bollards, putting in temporary crossings, I think that we didn't see there being a great support for that in the community to trial this as a temporary measure. So it's not something that we would usually do. It's not something that's required for us to do, and it's not something we saw any benefit in doing.
Presumably, on that basis, if there was no willingness or powers to make for a temporary closure, presumably we can be assured that future decisions would still be open. We've talked to the road safety audit and various things for future monitoring, and the council presumably are willing to monitor the effectiveness of the closure through a kind of ongoing evaluation as things go. If in the event it turns out that matters don't work out as you are hoping and anticipating.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Mark, do you want to comment on this aspect? Again, hands up, and then Paul.
Well, my comment, just listening to what was said, would comment would be, I mean, I did read what Norton had said about the temporary stopping up of the esplanade and the consequential backlash that happened as a result, and saying that stopping up orders with no clear purpose are not what should happen. I would simply say, I know, going back to what we're speaking about, we feel clear purpose would be assessing the viability and the safety over a protracted period of time in order to then ascertain whether that would be a solution or not.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, just to kind of add to what Mark's saying, if you do the permanent stopping up and it turns out to have been to not work out the way you guys think it will, then surely it would have been better to temporarily do it to evaluate the issues that we've got around traffic flow, etc. It doesn't seem like the fact that you got a lot of pushback from people on a temporary stopping up in the Esplanade is a good reason to not try it in Mill Street, but go straight to the permanent solution. That seems like it would be economically unviable if it didn't work out.
Okay. Anything further from the council?
So the last thing for myself, I suppose, is that the powers. I think the Esplanade is a comparable example of what I believe public reaction would be to closing Mill Street on a temporary basis without actually undertaking any works. Powers which we did that under were related to the COVID pandemic at a time where we were in lockdowns and. So it was quite a unique closure. It's not something we've done before, and I don't think it's something that we're going to be doing afterwards. And from a legal point of view, I don't think we've actually got the powers to do an experimental road closure to see how traffic flow reacts.
Well, Maureen might be able to answer that question, or maybe not. Maureen.
Yes, hoping to. Clearly there are only certain circumstances under different legislation in which the local authority can stop up a road, and as Ewan has indicated, an experimental approach is not something that's open to the local authority to do. So I don't think that's something that we would be recommending. I think in terms of we'd need to be under the Scotland Act, and I'm not seeing anything in terms of the Road Scotland Act that would allow the local authority to do that.
Okay, right, thank you. I can reflect that in my report, and then it'll be up to ministers duly advised to give their own advice on that, on consideration of this particular aspect. So thank you. Thank you all for that. The last agenda item is the issue of the special duty to have regard to the impact of the conservation area of the stopping up. And I know that I've seen in relation to the planning application, I've seen the consideration that is given to that, but I wondered if it'd be, Craig, you could maybe under specific reference and separating out, because this is a separate process, what the impact of the stopping up has on the conservation area and just the factors that were taken into account in deciding that this was acceptable, given the duty under the Listed Building Conservation Areas Act for the desirability of preserving or enhancing the appearance of the conservation area. I'm guessing it's
Yeah, no, I think so. We did like specific to Mill Street. That was given careful consideration. I think the streetscape itself just now has limited features of merit in terms of the conservation area. You're looking at windmill gardens and the surrounding hedge and low wall that will all be retained. I think the street itself, the streetscape, doesn't add much to the character of the conservation area. It's been tarmac surfaces on the road and the pavement. I think this is a good opportunity to enhance the streetscape. It would bring in landscape and public seating areas and a pedestrian path linking up the existing park areas and the beach that would, overall contribute positively to the character of Broughty Ferry Conservation Area. It also reflects, I think, on the planning and fine notices and that conservation areas need to change, need to adapt to modern living, and this is a way of doing that in a manner that's sensitive to the area, whilst meeting the aspirations and for transformational change. And the various other criteria set out by Sustrans. So I think overall, the proposal that's put forward was considered to meet the requirements of conservation area legislation and a benefit to the wider conservation area.
Okay, thank you. And Mark's got his hand up, I think, on this point.
Just to add to that, I mean, there's the whole conservation area. I mean, the aspect of it, I don't want to divulge into something else, but we had been heavily involved in discussions with the council, and it was really around the gardens aspect. And we noted that Castle Lane is designated as the difference or the border, the physical divide between recreational and residential. So the proposal there, where our frustration had been, was the proposal to put an extra entrance, for example, was one of the things that was there, was based on a conservation statement which we came across at the beginning, which actually had a statement saying that the gardens were so remote as to be unapproachable, quoting from there. And we had, in face-to-face meetings with council officers subsequently, when we asked, were told that there'd been any feasibility study done to undertake this. So we sort of questioned where that information had come from, and to our view, it would create what is that relaxational area, and putting a new gate right at the end of one of the entrances would open it up to really changing the function of the gate and displacing the people that were already looking for a quiet and tranquil space. So I suppose that had come in there under the, in that aspect, under the Conservation Act, would that part of it actually be enhancing, given what Craig has said? And I take on board the points about a modern community and having to adapt and change, but we just saw that as one instance where perhaps reserving it for a relaxational purpose, for what it was designed for, would be better left.
But Jerry was hand up just now, but then I'll give Craig an opportunity to comment if he wants to on Mark's point.
Just for your own benefit, Paul, I think some clarity on what Mark was talking about is that's another aspect that the residents have been complaining. It's totally separate to this project. It's nothing to do with the Mill Street closure. So it there's no relevance to the matters that we're discussing here today.
Okay, and Craig?
Yeah, I think like Jerry's touched on, I think we're looking at the breach and boundary wall to the rear of the houses at Castle Terrace and the park there. That was considered in the planning application, and I know there's been previous correspondence, but both for the works and the works on Mill Street have been fully considered. There's no loss of boundary walls and the entirety or anything like that. And the proposals are considered acceptable. You've touched on it, outlined in their statements in the planning committee report.
Just to say, the point had been it was more an enhancement given the nature of the space that was there before and what the potential is for changing it. It was just under the guise of enhancing a conservation area. That was really the point. It wasn't specifically because it was under conservation.
Thank you, Maureen.
Yeah, just to refer, I think might be helpful to refer to the conservation and design statement that was submitted and lodged, both at the planning application and also like this with the reporter. And I think that properly addresses the issue of conservation area and the impact on the conservation area. And this was by Nicol Architects, I think, who are involved in the design element of this project, and indicate that they are content that this is certainly consistent with the conservation area, and we certainly don't have any negative impact on the conservation area in any way at all.
And your position is that although that was prepared for the planning application, it's equal applicability to the stopping up order.
Absolutely, it incorporates the stopping up order in terms of
Thank you.
I think one particular aspect of this, and the important aspect of this, and much of the discussion this morning has focused on the road and the impact on transport and congestion and car travel of the stopping up. And little emphasis, I think, has been placed on the public realm and the enhancement of placemaking, which is also an integral aspect of this application. And the conservation aspect of the conservation area element of that, I think, is enhanced by certainly the council's position that there's an enhancement to the area by the linking, if you will, of Windmill Gardens with Castle Green. And I think, and you'll see in that design statement and the planning application, there is to be an exit from Windmill Gardens to the west, west boundary, which will form a link with Castle Green, which doesn't currently exist. And obviously, that will have very little merit if Mill Street in itself is not stopped up, because then in essence you will still have the traffic flow. And the purpose of the exit on the west from Windmill Gardens to link with Castle Green and widen the green space, as it were, is all in terms of enhancing that public space and the conservation area in which it's located.
Okay. Those were the issues I had from my agenda that I circulated earlier. I said at the beginning that I'd maybe make some reference to the objection documentation, and I'm just going to go and try and do this on screen and on from my notes, and just see if council officials want to add anything on points I'll identify as I go through them, insofar as not already addressed. I'm trying to make these points that doesn't duplicate what I've heard already. So the additional points I'd noted from that documentation were concerns, and Mr. Whitten had raised concerns about exhaust pollution, and Greenway had raised questions about difficulty of parking outside her property. Joan Haynes had raised a question about, again, air pollution because of the construction of a road hump outside their house and the noise that would be created from that. I think other objectors mentioned safety concerns. Sheila Stoka had given rise to concerns about the width of the road and the parking on both sides. And again, has spoken about exhaust fumes. Walter and June Dixon had spoken about what they describe as the current traffic flow being chaotic at times. I think they've probably covered much of that already. And that Brook Street's an accident black spot. There was reference there to a tight and blind bend at the McKinnon Centre entrance at Brook Street. Les Gourley, in his submission, made that point as well. Again, there was a concern. Leila Kalbasi had raised concerns about accident risk at Brook Street. And Hugh Begg had raised similar points about increase of the length of vehicle trips and increase in congestion and toxic fumes. He'd asked a question as to how the stopping up will increase the number of walking, cycling and wheeling trips, for emphasis on everyday journeys within Broughty Ferry. And those are other points that had been raised that I'm not sure have been specifically addressed. I don't know if anybody wants to come back on any of those particular points. There was one or two sort of diverse ones there. Maybe an exhaust pollution, Mr. Whitten, and exhaust pollution. I know there was some reduced. The traffic information suggests some reduced timings and junction delays. If anybody has anything near air pollution that they want to say anything on. Ewan.
Very much. In terms of air pollution, we haven't undertaken air pollution monitoring or modelling. What I would say is, though, that for the area, the scheme is designed to reduce the traffic overall. And secondly, the direction of trend in terms of low carbon transport will mitigate a number of these aspects in terms of the end of the sale of new combustion engine vehicles, the transition to electric vehicles and so forth as well. There's a note about the road hump noise. I don't think that's connected with the stopping up order. So we currently have powers to put in road humps, and we've got many road humps in Dundee. Parking outside the property, I think we've probably already covered that.
Yeah.
It's an everyday journey. Again, I did touch upon that earlier on about the modelling exercise that was undertaken against the Department for Transport guidance for modelling increases, and this is where the 127% increase in active travel usage comes from. And again, that is comparable to the measured figures from other similar sort of schemes and similar settings, which have been provided by Sustrans on post-modelling evaluation. The last point about the Brook Street accident black spot, it's a point I've made previously, but roads aren't safe. What we're not don't foresee this is going to be making the situation worse, and we do have a programme of annual monitoring and accident investigation measures to address accident cluster spots as well, is ongoing. But yeah, the as I say, Brook Street doesn't feature on that at the moment.
Okay, right. Thank you. I'm conscious. I mean, I'm grateful for Paul's contribution towards the discussion this morning. But I'm equally conscious that I've not actually really gone through with his objection of 21st April last year before me. I think the points you've made, Paul, probably all been addressed by going through the agenda that we looked at in the course of today. But I'll maybe just go to you next and say, is there anything else you really wanted to say in relation to your letter of objection on 21st April last year?
I think we've covered it all, to be honest with you. My main thing was I don't understand why we just don't put the cycle track around the castle approach and between the beach and the car park, and that would remove this whole discussion as far as I'm concerned. And I think we've covered that now. So no, I'm happy.
Okay, that's fine. And Mark, is there anything else you wanted to say that hasn't been covered already this morning? And again, I've seen and read your submissions.
No, it was just a point on what we were discussing earlier to say to Jerry, I wasn't deliberately trying to introduce something to do with a separate topic, read the gates. It was only under the enhancement aspect of it because it was under conservation, which was one of the headings. So.
Okay, thank you. And Maureen, is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up? Two other issues I wanted to raise about further representation in a site inspection. But is there anything you wanted to say by way of summary, or are you happy to rest on your legal submissions and the statement, the enhanced statement of reasons?
Yeah, I would just like to two things, I think, to confirm so that we're clear as far as the planning consent is concerned. And it was something that you touched on at the beginning of the hearing, was whether there was in fact an extant consent. And perhaps one of the reasons I raised the issue about the consultation and whether it was relating to the planning consent or the stopping up can be addressed at this point as well. And it's to do with the fact that there is an extant consent. There has been an extant planning consent in place now since January 2021. And that is what the stopping up order under the provisions of the planning legislation 207, 208 is tied to, as it were. Now that consent has not been challenged, it has not been reduced, and therefore it's simply the council's submission, the council's position that any of the issues, be it in terms of whether it should have been dealt with in a major application, whether it was inadequate consultation, really has no bearing on the stopping up element and aspect of this particular application, because the extant consent is there. And had the objectors had any issues or concerns with that consent, then the proper forum to address that would have been judicial review of that consent, and that has not happened. So we are, as we are, with the consent for the application that was placed before the Planning Committee. And in terms of that planning consent, the issue really for stopping up, which flows from that, is whether in fact it's necessary in terms of sections 207 and 208 of the planning legislation for the consent to be implemented. And it is the council's view that that is necessary, as illustrated in terms of the case that we just indicate the case, what the definition of necessary was. And as you say, you're aware of that, Mr. Kite. I won't go into that in any detail, but what is necessary in the circumstances of this case for the application and the proposal to be developed. And it is the council's view that, you know, as we can see from the plans that I've identified in the written statement, that to implement this consent, this stopping up is necessary. It's necessary to achieve the aims of the project, the wider scheme of which it forms a part. It's necessary to allow for the shared path through Mill Street for the continued cycle route. It's necessary for the enhancement of the public realm to link Windmill Gardens. It's necessary in terms of the funding that's being provided by Sustran, and although Mr. Mullen has said that obviously it's not the council's position that Sustrans will automatically pull the funding. We're not saying that, but for this proposal and for this aspect of the proposal to be completed, it has already been through stringent tests in terms of the criteria that it's required to meet. It's the council's position that it does meet this criteria. It's the council's position that there's adequate necessity in terms of the planning consent to enable the project to be completed, to enable the consent to be implemented, to enable those benefits of active travel, of enhanced placemaking, of value for money, of satisfying the balance between cyclists, wheelers, walkers and car users, always taking cognizance of the direction of travel, for want of a better word, of Scottish Government and local authority policies in respect of this proposal. All of these tests are satisfied. We absolutely understand and do not in any way, and Mr. McNaughton has recognised earlier in the hearing that this is not a local authority that's simply accepting what Mr. Pepper has to say from the Cyclist Forum. That's not what this is. But this is about transformational change, of which this application is a part. And transformational change has to start somewhere. And it has to start with developing projects that will encourage our younger people, our people, our travellers of the future, to see active travel as a means of travel, a mode of travel that's of equal value and has equal infrastructure with other modes of transport. And it's the council's view that this project does that, and that it does that in terms of section 207 and 208 in accordance with the extant planning consent.
Okay, thank you. Right, that I think is all the issues that I was wanting to raise this morning. Two last points before we close the hearing. One of which is we've had a good discussion about the various issues, and I don't see any reason to continue the hearing process for to a later date in relation to the issues arising. What I would say is, without inviting new evidence, because I think we've had the evidence before me through this process and what's been submitted already, I would say is if any parties come away from this and there were any burning issues that they feel they ought to have made, not in the by way of reduction of new evidence, but anything that they think I may have misunderstood, then I'd be happy for them to do so. I guess the same might apply for those who might be watching this, but if they do that, it needs to be done pretty quickly, because obviously I will now be setting about the task of writing my report to ministers, and I have a target date for doing that. Scottish Government always let the target date, so I've got a target date for doing that. So if there is anything that anybody feels after today that it's imperative is drawn to my attention, I'm happy to have that done. But that would really require to be done, say, within 7 days of today's date, no more than that. But that's an offer that's available to all parties, including actually those who are not participating today, but may have felt there's anything they want to add in relation to their objections. The other question, which arose really because of something that Mark had said in his written submissions, is the question of the merit of a site inspection. I think at that point when he wrote that, he wasn't aware that I had undertaken that. It was only intimated at around the same time as he made his submissions. But my question, I guess, is whether, in light of the fact that I've been on site and we've had this hearing today, whether parties feel that there's any further need for me to go on site, then it would be useful if they could indicate that just now, and also whether that's something that would be beneficial to go on an unaccompanied basis or whether I should go with parties. But I don't know. First of all, I'm going to start with the objectors first of all, with Paul first of all, then Mark, on that specific question about whether I need to come up to Dundee again and have a look at the Broughty Ferry area once more.
No, if you've been there already and I guess you got an understanding of what we're talking about, unless you feel there's something you're not understanding, I wouldn't see any need for it.
Yeah, and Mark?
I would, well, obviously representing a group, I would need to get some feedback, but I'll go with what Paul's saying just now.
Yeah. And Maureen?
Well, I'm content, Mr. Kekette, unless there's anything else specifically. I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything that they feel would be benefit from being specifically pointed out, but I think Council's put its case, and given that you've had a site visit, we're content to rest with that.
That's fine. But if you speak to those who have associated themselves with your representation, and if they take a different view, again, if you could advise my office as soon as you reasonably can about that possibility. But unless I hear from that, it would not be my intention to conduct a further site visit or site inspection. So I'll thank you all for your positive contributions this morning. It's certainly been very useful for me to get a real and better sense of the circumstances and the issues, and I will, as I say, go away and start the process of writing up my report, and I'll be submitting that to ministers in due course. I don't think there's anything else I'll have, but we have other questions. So I'll draw the hearing to an end, and I'll say thank you all for your participation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.